Chapter 1912. Ultimate Treasure. Yang Jian's eyes turned red when he heard the war goddess's appraisal of the treasure. Ultimate treasure. The soul gem was only a great treasure, but it was already able to unleash such power. Ultimate treasure was a level higher than great treasure. Didn't that mean? Are you sure? Yang Jian, who didn't know that the ultimate treasure was a disaster for the Milky Way galaxy, looked at the war goddess with excitement. However, the excited Yang Jian was met with a long silence from the war goddess. That kind of silence gave people a suffocating pressure. Her heavy eyes were filled with worry for the future. After a while, the war goddess sighed and nodded. I'm sure. The most direct difference between a great treasure and an ultimate treasure was the light. Before it was unearthed, due to the unique geography of the universe's secret realm, the treasure couldn't be determined by its aura. Only light. Both great treasures and ultimate treasures would emit a purplish-white light when they were unearthed. Those that emitted this light could be great treasures, but pure white light could only be ultimate treasures. Ultimate treasures unearthed, the outer races would definitely return to their races and send their elites to guard the entire process of the treasure being unearthed. In other words, those elites could be on their way, or Grand Priest. All of the six-armed beings outside suddenly knelt to the ground. Not long after that, an elderly man who also had 6 arms and was dressed in a purplish-green robe appeared in front of them. Yeah, we can understand what they're saying. Yang Jian raised his eyebrows in shock. He thought that the outer races would have their own language. The Milky Way galaxy used to be the center of a universe, and we learned the common language of a universe. They were speaking the common language of the universe, so naturally, we can understand them. The war goddess carefully explained. Let's not talk about this anymore. Let's go. Go. The ultimate treasure will be unearthed. Yang Jian didn't want to give up. Don't worry about it. If we don't go, well, who's there? Suddenly, the Grand Priest walked towards Yang Jian and the war goddess. With a shake of his arm, a dagger appeared in the palm of the war goddess's hand. Looks like we can't leave. At the entrance of a secret realm, as the owner of the soul gem, he needed to stay here in case of emergencies before the spirit formation that was set up using the soul gem as the formation core could mature and operate. It had been several days since the team that had gone to the palace to search for treasures had left. There was no reply. Yizichin couldn't help but worry. He gazed off into the distance. Perhaps he himself had forgotten how many times he had gazed into the depths of the secret realm. His gaze was deep and solemn. Don't worry. Elder Lin patted Yizichin's shoulder a few times. As if he could see Yizichin's anxiety, he smiled kindly and comforted him. They're all elites, and the goddess is among them. If there is any danger, the war goddess will warn them in advance and evacuate them safely. When he heard that, Yizichin, who'd been gazing off into the distance, finally looked away. Turning around, he saw that Elder Lin had already placed the table and chairs that he had brought from his hometown in front of him. There was even a pot of steaming hot tea placed on top of the table. Master, try this green tip. It's something my kids brought back from other planes. It has the effect of calming the mind. Yi saint tea. Yi dragon, yi the tea was. Yi, and yi was yi. The tea was warm, so he took a sip. The refreshing tea flowed down Yizichin's throat, transforming into a warm current that flowed slowly through his chest. Soon after, this strand of warmth flowed through his limbs and bones, completely calming the uneasiness in his heart. It really is good tea. Yizichin put down his cup and sighed in admiration. Elder Lin pursed his lips and chuckled. Of course, this tea was taken from a plane that had already been destroyed. What I have here is the last stock of this world. Even I don't dare to drink too much. A little bit is a little less. Destruction. Yizichin didn't know why, but lately, he seemed particularly sensitive to destruction. He barely heard Elder Lin's last words. The word destruction lingered in his mind. Why do you think there's always war? Yizichin said this from the bottom of his heart. He'd experienced far too many battles. The demon invasion, the great war between the heavenly palace and the demons. Now, the flames of war between the demons and gods, as well as the outside's desire to destroy the new era. Even in the modern realm, some countries were still embroiled in the flames of war, their people living in misery. It was as if war was the only way to rule the world. No world, no race, no country, no plane could coexist in harmony. The current secret realm, it was still the same. This, I don't know either. No matter what world you were in, war was unavoidable. At the end of the day, it was all about ambition. Every race had a desire to invade and enslave other races. When this desire reached its peak, the race's strength reached a certain level, and war was naturally imminent. Some wars were fought for self-preservation, while others were fought to invade. In short, it was inevitable. I don't know why, but I've been so flustered these past few days. All I can think about is this. Yi Zichen didn't get an answer from Elder Lin, so he just muttered to himself. Elder Lin simply patted him on the shoulder. I understand. You don't need to worry about the war goddess. I sent Lin Ru back to check on the outside and the new era. I'm sure you'll be at ease soon enough. Perhaps. Before Yi Zichen could finish his sentence, he saw two frantic figures rush towards them from both the entrance and the depths of the secret realm. Lin Ru, who'd gone to the outside and the new era, and Qing Feng, who'd gone into the depths of the palace. The instant he saw their expressions, Yi Zichen's heart sank. He'd been panicking the entire time. Grandpa, Yi Zichen, the king of the laws, Star-Lord Yi. The two of them called out to Elder Lin and Yi Zichen at practically the same time. What is it? Qing Feng, you go first. Elder Lin frowned. After calming them down, he looked at Qing Feng. A supreme treasure has appeared in the palace, and there are experts from the outside. The war goddess and the others are trapped around the palace and are currently fighting them. The situation is extremely urgent. Please, it's urgent here too. Right at this moment, Lin Ru directly interrupted Qing Feng. The God Emperor of the God race is dead. The God King of Destruction is the current God Emperor. He's currently massacring the other planes. The new era is one of them. Chapter 19:13. The current situation had fallen into a situation where they could neither advance nor retreat. Yi Zichen couldn't help but sigh when he heard Qing Feng and Lin Ru's news. No wonder he'd felt so anxious earlier. He'd already prepared himself, but he still hadn't expected it to be so terrible. The situation, it was a hard choice to make. The outsiders had invaded the central secret realm. Yang Jian, the great sage, and the war goddess were all in a difficult situation and couldn't leave. More importantly, the invasion of other races meant that the central mystery realm was no longer safe. It was very likely that they would pass through. They might pass through the entrance of the secret realm and head towards the Milky Way. When that happened, the Milky Way would face a calamity. If that was the case, Yi Zichen and Elder Lin would head towards the palace without any hesitation. No matter how strong the outsiders were, they had to use their bodies to defend the entrance and fight for the Milky Way survival. However, even without the outsiders' invasion, the Milky Way was still in danger. The God King of Destruction had become the God Emperor. Everyone in the world knew about this God King's ambition. His personality and actions were worthy of his title, Destruction. Destroying planes was what made him the happiest. What he loved to see the most was the scene of countless ethnic planes being destroyed. The decision was in Yi Zichen and Elder Lin's hands. It wasn't just Yi Zichen who felt troubled. Even Elder Lin found it hard to make a decision. He knew very well how strong the outsiders were. He was certain that they wouldn't be able to break free in a short period of time, much less punish them. Wasting a lot of time with them was the same as putting the Milky Way into dire straits. One had to know that their goal in coming to the universe secret realm was to protect the Milky Way galaxy. If this caused the Milky Way galaxy to be destroyed by the God King of Destruction, even if they won the battle against the alien races, they would only be able to return to see the destroyed Milky Way galaxy. That would be putting the cart before the horse. If they went to the Milky Way to stop the God King of Destruction, that would mean that they were going to give up on Yang Jian and company and no longer cared about their survival. Elder Lin estimated that if he, Yi Zichen, and everyone else at the entrance of the secret realm went to help, they had a 50% chance of survival. If they didn't go, then Yang Jian and Company's chances of survival were zero. Even if they bought some time for the Milky Way galaxy, the alien races would still find the secret realm entrance and come to the Milky Way galaxy. During this period of time, they were not confident that they could punish the God King of Destruction. At that time, the Milky Way galaxy would face the difficulty of being attacked from both sides, and the result would be that it would be difficult to escape the fate of destruction. It was difficult. No one would want to make such a choice. They would have to give up on one side, and even if they gave up on the other, the result would be barely satisfactory. The godly king of destruction is usurping the throne? How is this possible? How could the divine emperor die? While Elder Lin and Yi Zichen hesitated, Qing Feng's eyes widened in shock. All along, the divine emperor was a supreme existence in the hearts of the divine men of the outer domain celestial race. His strength caused countless planes to fear him. It was also because of his existence that the gods of the outer realm god race had the confidence to surpass other races. They believed that the divine emperor would always stand behind them. However, Lin Ru said that the god emperor was dead and the god king of destruction had taken the position of the god emperor. Are you doubting my words? Lin Ru glared at him. No, that's absolutely not what I meant. Qing Feng shook his head vigorously. I just don't dare believe it. It wasn't just him. When Yi Zichen and Elder Lin heard this news, their hearts sank as well. However, they trusted the information Lin Ru brought back. No matter how shocked they were, they couldn't show it. They were adjudicators. They had to maintain absolute calm at all times. However, Elder Lin was puzzled. He was sure that before leaving, they'd completely sealed the God King of Destruction's Godhead and Divine Sea. Even if the God Emperor was heavily injured, a starving camel was still bigger than a horse, much less Yale, who had no divine power. Besides, the God Emperor was protected by the Angel Kings and numerous experts of the era. How could he let Yale kill him? He really couldn't understand this, but he had no choice but to accept the truth. Star-Lord Yi, what do you think? Elder Lin, who'd been unable to make a decision for a long time, tossed this problem onto Yi Zichen's shoulders. He wasn't trying to shirk responsibility. He just wanted to understand Yi Zichen's thoughts before making a decision. If even Elder Lin couldn't make up his mind, how could Yi Zichen, who'd always had trouble deciding? To tell the truth, Gu Li's evaluation of Yi Zichen was spot on. In truth, he wasn't suited to be an adjudicator. Even if his cultivation was high and his status was high, he didn't have the cold-bloodedness an adjudicator should have. He liked to hesitate and was overcautious when faced with a problem. This was especially true when his friends and family were caught up in the maelstrom. That was the situation right now. Yang Jian and the great sage were close friends he couldn't bear to part with, and the Milky Way era had many of his family members. Even if the era had more friends and family than Yang Jian and the great sage, why should Yang Jian and the great sage fall into such dire straits? He couldn't make a decision. Tell me the specifics of your situation. Elder Lin could see Yi Zichen's internal struggle. Elder Lin could also see the struggle in Yi Zichen's heart, so he looked towards Qing Feng and Lin Ru. Qing Feng said to keep it short. We don't have much time. We encountered an alien with 6 arms in front of the palace. The war goddess has already confirmed that it's an alien from the universe. Right now, the people who went to search for treasures are fighting them at the palace gates. In truth, their cultivations aren't high. We can deal with them, but there's a person they call the High Priestess. The war goddess and the other overgods are still at a disadvantage. I'm here because they're doing their best to open up a gap. They told me to call for reinforcements. Qing Feng bit his lips. From his eyes, one could see the urgency in his heart. However, the palace really does need reinforcements, but the God King of Destruction. Lin Ru, go on. Just as Qing Feng was about to speak, Elder Lin immediately had Lin Ru make her report. The God King of Destruction, Yale, is unstoppable. From what I know, he's already destroyed over 3,000 planes. Countless races have been destroyed, and the experts of the era have all come out to fend off the attacks of the God race. Fortunately, Yale hasn't arrived yet. If he does, then the era won't be able to escape. Both of their words were relatively simple, but they both made the problem relatively clear. Chapter 19:14. The Milky Way Galaxy. The Milky Way Galaxy had taken a master of the galaxy's untold efforts to build. No one could have imagined that it would end up like this. As far as the eye could see, all they saw were destroyed planets. Countless ruined buildings floated in the sky, swallowed up by the surrounding black holes. Remember, not long ago, when Yizichin and the others had first entered the secret realm, everything had been as dazzling as a painting. The God King of Destruction. Yizichin couldn't help but mutter the culprit behind all of this. No matter who it was, Yale's sudden usurpation of the throne and the fall of the God Emperor were both unbelievable. However, given the current situation, there was no time to be shocked. They had to digest all of this as quickly as possible and think about how to deal with it. Of course, Yizichin's appearance in the Milky Way galaxy meant that he decided to head to the New Era's aid. Didn't that mean he'd given up on Yang Jian and the Great Sage? Only Yizichin and Lin Ru had left the secret realm. Elder Lin and the other experts had stayed behind to head to the location of the treasure. Making this decision was the best solution Yizichin could come up with. Both the palm and the back of his hand were flesh, and he couldn't cut them off. Even if Yizichin didn't go to the palace, he'd just be one less person. When he'd first made this decision, Elder Lin had opposed it. By now, Yizichin was no longer a dispensable character. He'd transcended the new era and was its strongest expert. His existence could very well influence the course of the war. It was very possible that, if he and Elder Lin went to the palace or the Milky Way at the same time, they might be able to reverse the situation. But if they split up, the Milky Way wasn't strong to begin with. If they split up, both sides' forces would be mediocre, and they'd lose everything. Yizichin didn't agree or disagree, but he persisted. He believed that with Elder Lin leading the others to the palace, they'd be able to hold out for a while. What he needed was just to stall for time, not to win. No matter what, don't advance rashly. Just guard the entrance to the secret realm. Yizichin repeated the same thing over and over in his head after leaving the secret realm. He was naturally worried about the situation in the secret realm. If Elder Lin's expression was so grave, it was obvious that the outsiders couldn't be underestimated. Yizichin didn't want them to win. He just wanted to rely on the formation of the soul gems in the secret realm. After persevering for a while, it should be possible. He bit down hard on his lips. No matter what, since he had already left the universe secret realm, he shouldn't be worried about the situation there. He needed to focus all his attention on the Milky Way. As for the universe secret realm, he could only trust Elder Lin's decision-making ability. Ji Yuan should have been safe before you arrived, right? Yizichin suddenly spoke up. He did not ask about the situation of the entire Milky Way galaxy. He only asked about Era. To him, the Milky Way was too big. He was very clear about his own capabilities. Protecting the entire Milky Way was the job of the master of the Milky Way, not an ordinary transcendence of an era. From the beginning to the end, what he wanted to protect was very simple. It was the epic, or rather, he only wanted to protect Ji Yuan's friends and family. Perhaps in the eyes of others, he was bemoaning the state of the universe and pitying the fate of mankind, like a savior who wanted to protect the world. Little did they know that deep in his heart, he was never as great as others thought he was. I guess so. Lin Ru's lack of confidence caused Yizichin's heart to skip a beat. Along the way, he saw the tragic state of too many destroyed planes, and his concern for the new era grew exponentially. Now that Lin Ru said it in such an uncertain tone, his eyes, which were already a little impatient, immediately reddened. How can it be considered as? Then how sure can I be? I don't know Yale very well, and I don't know the speed at which he destroys planes. Lin Ru gritted her teeth and shouted, "All I know is that before I left, Yale had yet to come to this era, and the planes surrounding this era were all relatively small. Safe. However, the current battle situation was changing rapidly. I could only hope that Ji Yuan was still safe. It's not just the era, there's also the land of law. I hope it's also safe." Yi Zichen could tell that the heaviness in Lin Li's heart was no less than Yi Zichen's. Just like that, the two of them silently traversed between planes. Witnessing the devastation of the destroyed planes, their desire to return grew stronger. Kill. Era God Clan, Northern Divine Mountain. Not long ago, during God King Joy and God King Freedom's plan to destroy the new era, the Northern Divine Mountain had suffered the most. The Northern Divine Mountain Sea Emperor, whose clansmen had practically been wiped out, was clad in his sea god set and fighting bravely above the sea of Innocence's surface. By his side were the few surviving clansmen of the Shui clan that remained since a long time ago. Quite a few of them were wrapped in bandages. Some had lost an eye, some had lost an arm. As far as the eye could see, it was hard to find a single uninjured clansman. Every single one of them was burning away the power of their bloodlines. They were like a pack of wolves forced into a corner. They swore to fight to the death. There was also the countless vicious beasts the Sea Emperor had once suppressed. That's right, they fought the Sea Emperor for countless years. Now that the Sea of Innocence was on the brink of destruction, they decided to fight alongside him. In front of him, there was an endless sea of well-equipped extraterritorial true gods. They'd surrounded the remaining Shui family clansmen. Judging from the current situation, it would only take a few hours to wipe out the Sea Emperor and his clansmen. The Sea of Innocence's waters were no longer as clear as before. Instead, they were blood-red. Kill! As the Sea Emperor roared, the Shui family clansmen and the vicious beasts of the sea charged the outsiders once more. Up in the sky, several Shui family clansmen and vicious beasts swayed and fell into the blood-soaked waters below. The Sea Emperor's eyes were bloodshot. He was in pain, whether it was his clansmen, his subordinates, or the vicious beasts who'd fought against him for countless years. They were all comrades who'd fought alongside him through life and death. As the number of people around him dwindled, the wounds on his body grew more and more numerous. He looked up at his surroundings. Even though they'd been fighting for days and nights, the outsiders didn't seem to notice their numbers dwindle. For some reason, tears welled up in his eyes. "My lord, didn't the Master of the Stars say these people were our allies?" One of the Ocean Emperor's subordinates cried out in despair. The Ocean Emperor smiled bitterly in response. Who said otherwise? If he hadn't treated them as allies from the start, the epic era wouldn't have suffered such heavy losses. Even now, the Ocean Emperor couldn't forget the day the outsiders had come to the epic era under the guise of being allies. The Upheaval Alliance's vice-alliance leader Xiao Yumei and the other great emperors had come to welcome them. When they'd gone to welcome them, they'd suddenly brandished their blades. Allies? What allies? They were all fake. What's with all that nonsense? What, are you scared? The Ocean Emperor glanced at his subordinate, who instantly straightened his neck as if he'd been injected with chicken blood. Chapter 19:15. May the light of life illuminate every corner of the world. Dazzling emerald light flickered in the sky. Su Yan, who had condensed the life godhead, curled up in the air and crossed her fingers. She closed her eyes and chanted piously. The godhead above her head responded to her words. After a brief tremor, the dazzling light spread out with her at the center. Heal! In an instant, the curled-up Su Yan spread her arms wide. Countless warriors in the light were baptized by the healing light. Their injuries healed even more directly than medicinal pills, healing at a speed visible to the naked eye. Not only that, when the healing light ended, Su Yan's brows sank. Her lips kept moving, and energy streaks were released from her godhead. Inspire, life godhead. Not far away, the invading Protoss experts muttered, their eyes filled with indescribable solemnity. This is so troublesome. The one who spoke was one of the primary gods under Yale's command. Through their investigations, the god, Yao, and demon races had discovered that the Yao race had been internally divided not long ago. 2 of the 4 Yao races had been punished for their rebellion. It could be said that the Yao race was the weakest of the 3 factions. The sovereigns under Yale's command had noticed this as well, and had wanted to choose an easy task. But what they didn't expect was to encounter resistance as soon as they entered. Even now, they couldn't advance even half a step. Their biggest obstacle was Su Yin, the life master god. Due to the life godhead's uniqueness, it inherited the status of a master god. In other words, it was equal to Yale's other master gods. But the life godhead was an auxiliary godhead. In terms of combat strength, it couldn't compare to any master god. But, however, its supportability was enough to give a god king a headache. Heal, revive, inspire. The life godhead's three most ordinary godhead skills could increase the Yao race's combat strength severalfold. In terms of strength, the Protoss were far superior to the Yao race. The Yao warriors indeed couldn't gain an advantage against the Protoss, but they had the support of the life master god. Heal when injured, revive when unconscious, encourage when passive. So much so that even if the Protoss had the advantage in numbers and realms, the experts of the Demon Clan would still rush forward as if they had been injected with chicken blood. Up until now, the extraterritorial divine race's casualties were probably even more severe than the demon races. We have to think of a countermeasure. If we wait for Lord Yale to arrive and see that we didn't even manage to kill our way into the Yao clan's hinterland, it's a small matter if he's disappointed in us. However, if he takes his anger out on us for not doing our job well, we won't even be able to keep our heads. The sovereign with the scar at the corner of his eye shouted frantically, and the other sovereigns nodded in agreement. Don't be fooled by the fact that they were sovereigns under Yale's command and had followed him for tens of thousands of years. However, they knew very well in their hearts that they were not even pawns in Yale's eyes. Chess pieces still had value, and they were at most dispensable lackeys. Moreover, now that Yale had ascended to the throne of the Emperor God, he, who had all the power in the world, had no lack of dogs. If they didn't do their job well, Yale could replace them without any qualms. He believed that there were many people in the Outer Realm God race waiting to take their place. Revive. The life goddess Su Yin continued to unleash her divine skills, and the Yao clan's warriors also surged forward to attack the Outer Realm God race's formation. What else can we do? Kill her. Suddenly, the overgods of the Outer Realm turned to look at Su Yin. If they wanted to destroy the Yao clan, they had to get rid of Su Yin, who was supporting them from behind. At this time, they couldn't help but feel ashamed of their previous ignorance. They had never taken auxiliary sovereigns seriously. In their eyes, only auxiliary sovereigns were the way of the king. This time, they truly witnessed the power of auxiliary sovereigns. She alone could make it difficult for the Yao clan's Outer Realm God race army to advance. She had to die. The commanding overgods standing in the sky locked their gazes on Su Yin. Without any unnecessary communication, a total of 6 overgods turned into 6 streaks of light, drawing long trails of light in the sky as they shot toward Su Yin. Golden dragon roar. Scorching dragon breath suddenly sprayed towards the 6 overgods. As overgod experts, they had long since experienced this sort of sudden situation far too many times. They didn't pay too much attention to it. They gently pushed their palms forward and condensed a shield. The dragon breath landed on the shield, and the splashing dragon breath directly turned the surrounding gods into pools of blood. Even the overgods couldn't help but feel their eyelids twitch at the heat. They inwardly rejoiced that they'd reacted in time. However, at this moment, the thick dragon tail had already heavily smashed into their shields. The powerful tremors caused the arms of the shield-wielding overgods to go slightly numb, and they were sent flying backwards. You want to bully Susu? Do you think Big Sister Kiki isn't here? Instantly, a rather cute yet arrogant chuckle appeared in the sky. Everyone then saw a golden dragon several hundred meters long, circling above Su Yan's head. The dragon's eyes were filled with disdain as it looked lazily at the overgods. Susu, don't be afraid. Kiki will protect you. The golden dragon was Su Yan's best friend, Xia Kiki. No one could believe that she'd grown to such a level after staying in the time artifact for half a year. If the head of the dragon race saw this, he'd definitely be moved to tears and sigh to the heavens. The dragon race finally had a successor. Su Yan only smiled in response. Right now, she only looked relaxed on the surface. In order to unleash a divine skill on such a large scale, She had to maintain a high level of mental tension so that she wouldn't make any mistakes. At the same time, she tried her best to expand the range of the divine skill. It could be said that this battle was actually a game between her and the gods. It was easy to imagine how much pressure she was under when she faced such a vast army of the gods alone. Golden Dragon. I didn't think there'd be such a primordial divine beast in this era. I wonder if your golden dragon has 5 claws. The repulsed over-god snorted with a sinister smile. Scatter. A golden dragon without 5 claws wants to stop 6 of us over-gods? It's basically, the over-god's words came to an abrupt halt. It wasn't just the gods. Even the many experts of the Yao race felt a chill wash over them. All the demons who sensed this chill subconsciously swallowed their saliva and quietly retreated. Then, snowflakes began to fall from the sky. At the center of the snowflakes, a prideful, queen-like woman slowly floated above everyone's heads. Chapter 1916. Frost filled the sky and drifted down to the ground. Everyone in the Yao race knew who had arrived. The experts of the nine-tailed fox clan who'd been fighting the Outlanders all retreated. Their leaders looked up at the sky. Big Sister Lu, you stole the limelight as soon as you appeared. Up in the sky, the golden dragon sighed sadly, then transformed into a cute young girl. She glanced at Su Yin as if seeking comfort. Su Lu's entrance was far too flashy. Even if she transformed into a golden dragon, she wouldn't be able to steal the limelight. Su Yin simply shrugged. Her big sister had always been like this. An expert. The over-gods of the god race furrowed their eyebrows slightly as well. The ordinary-looking snowflakes hid frightening power within them. Although the frigid air didn't mean much to them, they firmly believed, if the snowflakes in the sky truly attacked, even they, the over-gods, would feel threatened. Big Sister Lu, I haven't had enough fun yet. Why did you come out? Susu will definitely be fine with me here. Xia Kiki pouted and yelled at the sky, her expression filled with displeasure. You little brat, you really are arrogant. Not even the head of the dragon race would dare say something like that. As she spoke, Su Lu slowly landed in front of Su Yin, atop her snow-white lotus. She looked at Su Yin dotingly, but also a little heartache, then tousled Xia Kiki's hair. Leave them to me. Can you stay here and protect little Yin? No problem. Leave Susu's safety to me. Xia Kiki puffed out her chest and giggled. Su Lu looked deeply into Su Yan's eyes. The two of them nodded at each other. Then Su Lu stepped forward 100 meters. The Outlanders. Su Lu's icy voice seemed to descend from the 9 heavens. Frost swirled around her, and a heart-chilling coldness filled her eyes. She glared at the over-gods, her gaze forceful. I've long since heard of you, but I've never seen you in person. Now, I'll give you 2 choices. Surrender or be completely annihilated. Instantly, Su Lu's body emanated an incomparably tyrannical aura. The surrounding cold air also became rapid at this moment. Her face was filled with a cold beauty that looked down on the world. Wow, Big Sister Lu is so domineering. If I didn't have Yi Zi in my heart, Big Brother would fall in love with her. Xia Kiki smiled with a heart in her eyes. Hearing this, Su Yin didn't comment. Su Lu had always acted like a queen. Quite a few people fell head over heels for her cold elegance. I didn't have a deep understanding of your era before, but after coming here, I've really discovered that you all have something in common. The Outerium Protoss chief god snorted enigmatically. What? Asked Su Lu indifferently. Arrogant. As soon as he finished speaking, a godhead suddenly appeared above the chief god's head, and violent divine power gushed out like a broken dam. The Yao experts couldn't help but shudder in fear. Su Lu stood in the center of the vortex, her eyes still filled with disdain. He felt disdain towards this sovereign's provocation. Don't just stand there. If Sir Yale hadn't flattened this place before he arrived, none of us would have been able to escape. It was also these words that caused a commotion to appear in the Outerium divine race. Everyone could clearly see that there were quite a number of people within, whose brows were filled with struggle. Soon after, they slowly walked out from within. Every single one of them had a godhead above their heads, and their auras were all at the overgod realm. As far as the eye could see, there were 20 of them. Big Sister Lure, Xia Kik's heart jolted. She never would have guessed that the overgods who'd just appeared weren't all of the Outer Realm's overgod experts. There were 20 overgods, even if it was Su Lure standing in front of them. Protect Lil Yin. Su Lure whipped her head around, her voice brooking no argument. Xia Kiki, who'd been just about to transform into her golden dragon, bit her lip and retreated. However, the 20 overgods still made her frown deeply. Attack! The Outer Realm chief god didn't wait any longer. 20 overgod experts attacked Su Lure from all sides. Quite a few Yao experts clenched their fists. Although they'd never clashed with an overgod before, they could tell just how strong they were from their auras. Su Lure, the future of the nine-tailed fox clan, the successor of the Breath of Ice, the master of martial songs, one of the 4 auxiliary stars. Even without the Empress, he could be considered the strongest expert in the Eastern Empire. Even Su Wanner, the head of the Fox clan, wouldn't be a match for him after she activated the Breath of Ice and the auxiliary stars. If she fell here, she'd break the backbone of the entire Yao race. No one could stand in the way of the Outer Realm gods. The Yao race would no longer have any defensive barriers. In courage, fully aware of this, Su Yin seized the opportunity to use a supplementary battle technique on Su Lure. Su Lure instinctively glanced at her, then smiled at her. How dare you get distracted? A long blade suddenly appeared in the overgod's hand. The blade glinted with cold light as it sliced precisely at Su Lure's snow-white neck. Big Sister Lure, cried Xia Kiki wide-eyed. Ding! A crisp sound rang out in everyone's ears. Then they saw a silver iron staff stop in front of the overgod's blade. Big Sister Lure, can't you be a little more serious? He's a lord of the Outer Realm, not a little doll. The words of complaint came from a young man with a hogue on top of his head. When he spoke, the erecta hogue even shook twice spiritually, as if it was nodding. I'm just testing you, said Su Lure, completely unconcerned. Spare me, said the ahogue helplessly. I hate scenes of a hero saving a damsel in distress. Besides, a damsel like you can't possibly repay me with your body. If you keep talking glibly outside, Lori might find out. Suddenly, a fatty in cyan robes appeared beside Su Lure and the ahogue. If you dare tell Lori about this, I'll fight you to the death. The ahogue glared at the fatty, then rolled his eyes. You're too slow. You should lose some weight. Bullshit. This is my standard body. The fatty glared at him. There's still someone behind me. What's there to be anxious about? Then are you trying to say I'm fatter than you? At that moment, a soft voice echoed through the sky. Then a long river with no end in sight poured down from the sky. Above the river stood a man in a black robe. When it was almost Su Lure's group, he leaped down from the river and stood beside the fatty. This Xia Kiki, who'd been filled with anxiety just a moment ago, instantly froze. She looked at the 4 people standing together. Chapter 1917. Now that the Lord of the Emperor Star had transcended, the 4 great auxiliary stars gradually entered everyone's sights. When the Emperor Star wasn't in the Emperor Star, most matters within the era were handled by the 4 great auxiliary stars and the higher-ups of the Upheaval Alliance. As a result, the people of the era, whether they were old or young, were no strangers to them. When the demon race's mighty figures saw the appearance of the 4 auxiliary stars, their worries lessened significantly. No matter what, the Emperor Star wasn't in the era. If the 4 auxiliary stars went all out, they could be considered the strongest after the Emperor Star. Even the rare half-step transcendence cultivators of the era could only fight evenly against them. This was the power of Starlight. After fusing with Starlight, even the most ordinary Lord of the Stars could increase his strength several-fold. This was especially true during this period of time, as the Society of Saints continuously researched and developed the power of the stars. The Lord of the Stars had become even more proficient at using Starlight. The Star Altar had long since become one of the era's pillars. However, since when did they get along so well? The Yao experts couldn't help but mutter to themselves. It wasn't as if they'd never seen the four auxiliary stars gather before. Half a year ago, they hadn't even gotten along so well. Judging from their words and actions, it was as if they'd known each other for many years. What was even more unbelievable was that the Fox clan's cold queen, Sulur, would smile faintly when she saw them. This was something the Yao emperors had never seen before. No matter the occasion, this cold queen's expression was as cold as ice. Her words and actions radiated a coldness that kept everyone at arm's length. Only in front of her relatives, Su Yin and Su Zhe, would her expression soften slightly. When she faced her other clansmen, she remained as cold as ever. Just now she'd actually smiled. Although it was very faint, she'd definitely smiled. Su Lu naturally didn't notice that her actions had shocked the Yao experts so much. In truth, even she herself hadn't realized she'd smiled just now. It had all been a subconscious reaction. In truth, in her heart, she was still as cold as a mountain of ice. Perhaps it could be said that the moment that person died in front of her, her heart had been sealed. She could no longer melt for anyone else. With his heart sealed in ice, how could he possibly smile? Why would she subconsciously smile at her colleagues? Perhaps it was all because of the influence of the previous auxiliary planet lord. Indeed, the four great auxiliary stars had only known each other for a short time, but their relationship had improved very quickly. The reason for this might be because that reign of stars, this reign was very special. Only the Lord of the Stars could sense its existence. Only the true Lord of the Stars, who had once been chosen by the stars, could sense the existence of that reign. That night, the Milky Way shone brightly. The Star Lords of the Brahma star system had gathered in the galaxy. They had all found their own stars in that reign, obtained the inheritance of the previous Star Lord, and carried the memories of the previous Star Lord. At that time, none of them understood the purpose of the reign. It wasn't until the god race's sudden invasion that these Star Lords realized the reason for the reign's appearance. Stop messing around here. Hurry up and deal with these people. The sooner we deal with them, the sooner we can call it a day. Looking at her three colleagues, Su Luer couldn't help but shake her head helplessly. In truth, according to the system of the Star Dynasty, the minister of the left was subordinate to the prime minister. He was the one with the highest status among the four auxiliary stars. But even with the memories of the previous Star Lord, Su Luer's influence on them was probably even deeper. In the end, Su Luer of the martial song star still held the leading position among them. When they heard Big Sister Luer's words, the other three auxiliary stars tactfully shut their mouths. Go Yuzhan was even more obsequious. A silver staff suddenly appeared in his hand, and he held it against his neck with both hands. He looked very much like a young supreme. Treasure. Big Sister Luer, just tell us who to fight. We're your soldiers. We'll fight wherever you say. When Yin Shang and Emperor Hades saw this, they couldn't help but twitch their lips in disgust. Judging from the shape of their lips, they seemed to be saying lackeys. Although they scoffed at Go Yuzhan's behavior, Yin Shang and Emperor Hades took out their own treasures. The 8-formation origin chart hovered above Yin Shang's head. Emperor Hades' treasure was even more impressive. It was the river Styx, which had once stood guard between the human and Yao realms. The four of them stood proudly, as if they were an impregnable wall. They stood outside the great gates of the Yao realm. Where should we fight? Su Luer raised her eyebrows. Then her gaze fell on the overgod who'd attacked her first. I don't like the look of him. How about we finish him off first? All right, go ahead. With that, the four auxiliary stars attacked simultaneously. Even though the arrival of the four auxiliary stars had caught the overgods off guard, their strength was still there for all to see. There was no need for them to feel fear over this. At practically the same time, the god race experts attacked one after the other. Kill! As the generals clashed, the soldiers below them didn't sit idle either. In the blink of an eye, the experts of the god race and Yao race clashed. Revive. Heal. Encourage. The life goddess Su Yin unleashed her divine techniques without pause. For a moment, the Yao realm descended into chaos. Hey, that's not right. At that moment, Xia Kiki, who'd been assigned to protect Su Yin, furrowed her brows. Every corner of the new era should be engulfed in the flames of war. Based on her years of experience watching dramas, if Yi Zichen was emperor, his foundation lay in the god race. As officials of the Star Dynasty, the 4 auxiliary stars were supposed to protect the god race. Perhaps Su Luer belonged to the Yao race and cared about them, so she appeared to help them quell the chaos. The other 3 auxiliary stars were all god race members. Why had they appeared here? Did they no longer care about their country? Or perhaps the god race had already settled the flames of war, so they'd come to the Yao realm to quell the chaos. But even so, would they dare leave the god race during these special times? Even if the flames of war subsided, they'd stay behind to protect the god race, lest chaos reappear. For Big Sister Luer's sake, that was possible, but it was minuscule. In summary, there is only one possibility for the 4 of them to appear in the Yao realm. They'd received orders. And the only person who could order them was... Boom! Boom! Cannon fire roared. Countless shells suddenly appeared in front of Xia Kiki, exploding in the midst of the god race troops. Chapter 1918. Cannon fire rumbled. Hundreds of cannons stood in the air above the Yao territory. Their muzzles flashed with light, and a constant stream of spiritual energy-condensed shells landed accurately within range of the Outer Realm gods. The Yao experts, however, were lucky enough to survive. When the Outer Realm gods charged, the Yao experts acted as if they were fainting. Halfway through their charge, they suddenly dodged to the side. As a result, the entire sky was filled with Outer Realm gods, and the cannonballs landed among them without a care in the world. Suddenly, "Hey, how are you guys?" Suddenly, Xia Kiki felt someone pat her on the shoulder. She turned around and saw Zhou Mo standing behind her, a smile on her face. "Why are you here too?" They were all inextricably linked to Yi Zichen, so they naturally knew each other. When she saw the 4 auxiliary stars come to the Yao race's aid, Xia Kiki was already in a daze. Now, Zhou Mo was here too. "Have you resolved the situation with the gods?" "You could say so." Zhou Mo stretched lazily and shrugged. "There's still a few gods left, but with the ancients around, it's only a matter of time before we capture them." With that, Zhou Mo took out a pair of binoculars. She stared at them for a long time. "You guys really are amazing. The Outer Realm gods should have attacked the Yao and God realms at the same time, but they haven't even broken through your gates." "It's all thanks to Susu," said Xia Kiki with a smile. Xia Kiki giggled. Su Yin also nodded towards Zhou Mo, her face filled with exhaustion. "Hey, did your research department develop all these cannons?" asked Xia Kiki. Cannon fire rained down from the sky. The power of these cannons couldn't be underestimated. After a few volleys, the Outer Realm gods suffered far more casualties than the Yao had ever suffered. Every volley posed a fatal threat to the extraterritorial deities. Quite a few gods were thrown into disarray. Some tried to leave the range of the cannons, while others tried to defend themselves. However, the cannons were merciless. Their overwhelming firepower made it impossible for them to do anything. All they could do was become live targets for the cannons. Such powerful weapons of war were impossible to ignore even if they wanted to. You could say so, but we're just assembling them according to the blueprints. In order to forge these god-powered cannons, almost all the blacksmiths of the celestial race had come. After staying in the time artifact for half a year, there are only 200 finished products. Zhou Mo walked up to Su Yin as she spoke. She gently wiped away the sweat on Su Yan's face with a silk handkerchief in her hand. From the beginning of the god race's invasion of the Yao race, Su Yin had used the life godhead's divine skill to support the Yao race's clansmen, allowing the Yao race to remain invincible. She had not rested for a long time, so one could imagine how much energy she had consumed. He took out a pill from his pocket and gently placed it next to Su Yan's lips. "Take a break. Don't force yourself. With us here, the fate of those extraterritorial deities has already been decided. If you tire yourself out, someone will feel sorry for you." Su Yin, who was just about to thank him, suddenly froze. Xia Kiki's eyes also widened, and her spirited eyes couldn't help but look around. He's here too, that's right. If it wasn't for him, who else would be able to command the 4 auxiliary stars and 200 god power cannons? So Mo chuckled, then glanced at Su Yan's pretty face. A hint of jealousy flashed through her eyes. You might not know how anxious he was back then. 200 god-powered cannons fired in unison. The god-powered cannons were different from the modern realm's cannons. Their construction was much more complicated. Otherwise, all the master blacksmiths of the god race wouldn't have spent half a year in the divine artifact of time only producing this much. 200 of them. The god-powered cannons used spiritual energy, not cannonballs. Every round of firing required the spiritual energy of at least a god general. Hence, beside the god-powered cannon, there were at least 10 god generals guarding each cannon. When a divine general ran out of spiritual energy, he would immediately use a divine-grade spirit recovery pill to recover. A single volley was equivalent to 200 divine-grade spiritual recovery pills. Fire as hard as you can. Wherever you see the most people, fire. A red-faced youth stood atop the cannons. He pointed ahead and shouted at the top of his lungs. He was Yi Zichen. His eyes were bloodshot, and his face was so red it reached his neck. Every vein in his body bulged, and the veins on his neck and forehead bulged. Although he'd mentally prepared himself on the way back, he never would have guessed the first era would fall into such dire straits. The god race had suffered heavy losses. More than 40% of the 9 divine mountains people had died. As far as the eye could see, there was nothing but ruins. There were also groups of 2 or 3 gathered together, fighting the gods of the outside. Tragic. Tragic was the only word that could describe the war between the god race and the outside. Blood flowed for tens of thousands of miles. Even standing in the atmosphere, one could smell the acrid stench of blood. The northern divine mountain had already suffered heavy losses during God King Pleasure's reign. Now, not even a tenth of its clansmen survived this battle. The other divine mountains and sacred lands weren't faring much better. The divine mountain emperors were all in full armor, and even their clansmen had gone into seclusion. Even their elders had emerged from seclusion, all for the sake of surviving the first era's calamity. Yi Zichen's heart ached. In truth, after transcending, he could have set up a defensive barrier around the first era, just like he'd done in the first era. But he hadn't done so because it would have taken a lot of time. The situation in the secret realm of the universe was urgent. Coincidentally, the God Emperor had signed an alliance agreement with the First Era, so he felt like the First Era might be safe. In the end, Yale had usurped the throne, and the God race had turned the tables. The First Era, who'd once been a thorn in Yale's side, had become his target of destruction. When Yi Zichen first arrived in the skies above the First Era, he'd personally witnessed the gods of the outside brutally murder a defenseless mother with a baby in her arms. After all, the mother was just an ordinary Earth Supreme. The baby she carried wasn't even a year old. She'd already knelt and begged the gods to spare her, even if it meant sparing the baby's life. These extraterritorial gods were like cruel executioners. They slashed at the mother's body, not even sparing the baby in her arms. War was cruel. Yi Zichen was well aware of this, no matter how much Yale and the gods of the outside viewed him as an enemy. Wasn't it a little too much for them to put the butcher's knife on those innocent people? Chapter 1919. The god-powered cannon's muzzle flashed brilliantly. The experts of the demon clan couldn't help revealing shock on their faces as they watched the gods of the foreign domain god clan and heard their miserable shrieks. They fought the outsiders for several days now. They knew full well how difficult they were to deal with. Even with the goddess of life's assistance, they could only hold their ground at the Yao's entrance. They couldn't push them back. But now, these 200 cannons had accomplished something the Yao had never accomplished before. The celestial race, which used to be filled with mighty celestial warriors, had brought a huge visual impact to the demon race. But now, it had become a disaster for the celestial race. It had become the god-powered cannon's favorite firing environment. Boom! Another round of god-powered cannons fired. Once a divine general ran out of spiritual energy and left the god-powered cannon, other divine generals would take his place without delay. It's worth mentioning that the god-powered cannon was truly miraculous against the outsiders. No wonder the first era's Master of the Stars had specially given Yi Zichen its blueprint. Whether it was the pill recipe or the god-powered cannon's blueprint, they were all weapons against the god race. These cannons are really vicious. Go Yuzhan rubbed his ahog. Just now, a cannon had flown right past his head. The energy of the cannon had numbed his scalp. He couldn't help but rub his head to make sure his ahog was still there. Only then did he relax. How could this be? Even the god race's overgods didn't act rashly after seeing the cannon fire. Not to mention the gods from the outer realms. Even the overgods could smell the danger from the cannon fire. Countless gods had been gravely injured or killed. All of this was seen by the sovereigns. In just a few short minutes, the outsiders had suffered grievous losses. They couldn't let this go on. That was the thought in the overgods' minds. With the goddess of life's assistance, it was already extremely difficult for the outsiders to attack the Yao. The four people in front of them weren't mediocre either. Now, 200 cannons had appeared. They had to retreat. Even if they were rebuked by the God Emperor of Annihilation, they couldn't force themselves to persist. They could not see any hope at all. As long as the cannon fire did not stop, the casualties of the extraterritorial true gods would only increase. They were not puppets. They had their own thoughts. In a situation where they knew that they would be sending themselves to their deaths, and in a situation where they could not see any hope at all, there was no way they could brace themselves and lead millions of true gods into the abyss. Bang! Without any prior agreement, the 20 overgods all raised their presences at virtually the same time. The divine power that leaked out caused heaven and earth to darken. The wind howled, and the only thing that could be seen in the dusky heaven and earth were their dazzling divine sparks. The four auxiliary stars couldn't help but feel apprehensive when they saw this. He stopped chatting and focused on the many sovereigns in front of him. No matter what, master gods were considered peak existences in the outer realm god race. Even though they were auxiliary stars and could absorb starlight into their bodies, they still had to be cautious when facing master gods who outnumbered them 5-1. From the looks of it, they seemed to want to fight to the death with them. The howling winds were accompanied by ear-piercing wails as sand and stones swept past the four auxiliary stars and the foreign realm overgods. No one made a move, but it could be seen that both sides were very cautious. For some reason, the divine cannons stopped firing, but the frightened gods were still in a state of chaos. No matter how much their superiors shouted at them, they could not maintain order. Third era, you really do have some tricks up your sleeves. The overgod in the lead stared at the four auxiliary stars, his eyes flashing sinisterly. He nodded solemnly, then swept his gaze across the gods behind him. When he saw that more than half of his troops had been injured, the sinister glint in his eyes became even more obvious. We have nothing to say to those who betray our allies. As she spoke, the temperature plummeted. In less than half a breath's worth of time, the temperature dropped to below zero. The Yao territory was covered in thick snow, and the rivers showed signs of freezing. Ah! The overgod sneered, but he couldn't hide his shock. It was just as he'd thought. This woman who played with ice and snow was not to be underestimated. Although the others by her side hadn't revealed their true strength, since they'd traveled with her, they weren't too far behind. What's more, that hairy guy had blocked his dagger. Even before that, he hadn't sensed how he'd appeared. He glanced at the divine cannons in the sky. It seemed that although the cannons were powerful, they consumed an enormous amount of energy. The cannons had stopped firing, no surprise, because they couldn't replenish their energy. This was an opportunity for the Outerium god race. Whether they attacked the Yao territory or retreated. Between the two choices, the overgod, who seemed to be their commander, decided to retreat. No one knew when the divine cannon's energy would be replenished. If the cannons were replenished while they were attacking, the gods would lose everything. Furthermore, they had no way of dealing with the goddess of life. Before coming, they'd underestimated the first era's power. Now, they had to retreat and think things over. Whoosh! A blazing inferno suddenly appeared in the sovereign's palm, and the temperature released by the flames also slightly warmed the surrounding cold. Go Yuzhan strode forward, his silver staff in both hands. Emperor Hades, Su Iyun, was surrounded by a long river. Black light flashed in his eyes. The 8-formation origin diagram lay flat beneath his feet. Inshang stood at the eye of the formation. Su Lu stood at the very back, her icy aura abnormally turbulent. Retreat. At that moment, the 4 auxiliary stars prepared for the final battle. To everyone's surprise, the overgod flung the flames in his hands at them, then turned to leave. Go Yuzhan scattered the flames with a swing of his staff. There was nothing special about them at all. In terms of attack power, they couldn't even compare to a divine general's all-out attack. They'd been intimidated. Inshang's expression was unsightly. At the end of the day, they were still too afraid of the gods. They hadn't seen through the gods' ploy. The mighty army of gods retreated. If they chased after them now, they could easily kill a few, but the overgods wouldn't be able to catch up. If they couldn't capture their commander, what was the point of capturing more soldiers? The 4 auxiliary stars angrily waved their hands. Su Lu gnashed her teeth, her expression unfriendly. However, at that moment, a huge flaming net almost covered the entire heavenly region, completely sealing off the retreat route of the 4-domain god race. Chapter 1920. The net of flames was like a giant cage, sealing off all escape routes for the god race over gods. The overgods stopped right in front of the net. The whispers in the sky caused them to knit their brows. When they looked up, they saw Yi Zichen smiling down at them. Lord of the era. Every god race, over god, recognized Yi Zichen. The former god emperor's alliance had been announced to the entire race. All of the Outer Realm god race experts participated in that alliance assembly. There was no way the god race over gods were mistaken. The man in the sky was the Lord of the era. The information they'd received didn't say that the Lord of the era had gone to a secret realm. How had he received word that the era had been gravely injured? Could it be that someone from the era had gone to notify him? In that case, everyone in the secret realm already knew that Yale had ascended to the God Emperor's throne. Then the King of the Laws, when they thought of Elder Lin, a hint of panic appeared in the eyes of the trapped sovereigns. Every god race member knew of Elder Lin's relationship with the God Emperor. Furthermore, he was on the same level as the God Emperor. If the old man found out, wouldn't he be so angry that he'd implicate them as well? Although they'd come to attack the god race, most of them had been coerced by Yale. They didn't want to do this. The Lord of the era had returned. Could it be that Elder Lin was here too? Everyone, it seems you're afraid of something. Yi Zichen smiled and slowly descended from the sky. The 5 elemental spirits followed him, and the fire elemental spirit stretched out a hand. It seemed to be controlling the net of flames. Along the way, Yi Zichen tilted his head and glanced at the fire elemental spirit. The net of flames that covered half the sky shrunk until it was only enough to trap the overgods. The god race members who'd escaped didn't even think about it. With that thought in mind, no one paid any attention to the master gods who were still trapped. They fled out of the epoch without even looking back. They didn't want to experience the bombardment of cannon fire again. If they stayed in the era, who knew how many of them would survive? The overgods naturally saw this as well. They could only watch helplessly as their subordinates fled. Although the sovereigns were enraged, there was nothing they could do. From the epic Star-Lord's actions, they knew very well that the Star-Lord only wanted to keep them, the overgods, behind from the very beginning. Are you all afraid of me? Yi Zichen, who'd already landed in front of the lords, chuckled. His completely defenseless lips curled into a bitter smile. I don't think so. If you're really afraid of me, you wouldn't have attacked me with such great fanfare. Since you've done this, it means that you don't care about me, a Star-Lord of an era. Of course there is. Some of them were coerced. The sovereigns, hearing this, were silent. As the flame net shrank, its fire elemental essence became more concentrated. Previously, the sovereigns had only felt scorching heat, but now they felt scorching heat. That steaming heat wave made them sweat profusely. The sweat that flowed out was instantly evaporated into water vapor, and the water in his body was also being rapidly consumed. Puff! At that moment, several jets of water splashed onto their bodies. The sovereigns, who'd nearly fainted from the heat, regained some of their senses. Yi Zichen gently patted the water elemental fairy on the head. Not bad. After praising them, Yi Zichen glanced at the outer realm over gods and gestured for the fire elemental fairy to lower the temperature of the net. The scorching heat gradually subsided. The near-dehydrated sovereigns collapsed to the ground, paralyzed. At first, they'd been too afraid to break free. Now, even if they wanted to, their bodies wouldn't allow them to. Some of you were loyal to the former god emperor, right? Yi Zichen slowly knelt on the ground and looked at the sovereigns. The sovereigns merely glanced at him. Although their expressions varied, they said nothing. I know there are definitely some among you. In truth, you only attacked the epic because you were threatened by Yale. I know all this because I trust the former god emperor. He told me that most of the gods of the outer realm are peace-loving. What's the point of saying all this? Are you going to let us go? Sneered one of the sovereigns. The speaker was an over-god loyal to the former god emperor. It was just as Yi Zichen had said. He'd come to attack the epic because he was threatened. His wife and daughter were in Yale's hands. He had no choice but to come. From the moment he'd set foot in the epic, he'd never thought he'd be able to return alive. Even after everything Yi Zichen had said, he'd never thought he'd let him go. In any case, he'd come here for whatever reason. The instant he'd brandished his blade at the epic clansman, he'd already stood against the epic. The epic's Lord of Stars. How could someone who'd reached such a position be merciful? How could he possibly let his executioners leave after slaughtering his own people? Do you think that's possible? As expected, Yi Zichen stood outside the net of flames and formed a screen of water with a wave of his hand. Shockingly, the images he saw when he'd first entered the epic were of women and children he couldn't save in time. They died at the hands of outsiders. If I let you go, who's going to pay for their lives? Many of the sovereigns looked away. In truth, most of them didn't like war. They all had children, so they understood the despair and pain in the images. However, in this war of aggression and destruction, they'd played the role of the invaders. Given what had already happened, their grief was superfluous. That's what I saw. I don't know how many more there are. He clenched his fists and shattered the screen of water. He gnashed his teeth and glared at the sovereigns. He didn't even try to hide his anger. I really want to grind your bones to dust, but my anger can't make me lose my mind. I'm well aware that you're merely executioners. The true mastermind is your god emperor, Yale. I'll give you a chance right now. Yi Zichen took a deep breath, narrowed his eyes, and took a few steps back. He glanced at the fire elemental sprite, who understood and expanded the cage to roughly 100,000 cubic meters. I trust you've all seen the Beast Coliseum before? It's just that before, you were the ones watching others. Now, I'm the one watching you. In this cage, whoever stands until the end will be able to leave this place and reunite with your loved ones. Chapter 1921. There was no room to maneuver. The flame arena trapped the overgods inside. In order to ensure that they could carry out Yi Zichen's demands, the arena's area shrank as time passed. A total of 20 overgods were scattered throughout the arena. Even if they were once good friends, at this moment, they subconsciously separated from the people around them and looked at each other. Suspicion. Suspicion. Every expert in the arena had strange thoughts, and they all knew that every single one of them wanted to live. Star-Lord Yi, you're truly skilled. At that moment, a man with long hair covering his face stepped out from a corner of the arena. He gripped a heavy hammer in his right hand. His muscles rippled with power, and his entire body radiated explosive power. The moment he moved, the other overgods in the arena instinctively made way for him. From this, it was clear that this overgod held a fairly high position among them. Even if that weren't the case, he was still far stronger than the other overgods. He didn't attack anyone. Instead, he hefted his hammer and walked up to the spot closest to Yi Zichen. You trapped us here and forced us to kill each other for a chance to survive. This is my final mercy for you, said Yi Zichen expressionlessly. Mercy? The hammer-wielding overgod threw his head back and laughed. Then his gaze darkened. Like a wild beast about to break out of its cage, his gaze filled with aggression. "Thank you for your mercy, but the way I see it." Dong! He swung his hammer, and his godhead flashed with light. In everyone's line of sight, they could only see a silver ray of light streaking across the cage of the battle arena. The cage that was constructed from flames was cut open. A fierce gust of wind blew against Yi Zichen's face. He stood in front of the open cage and heard an angry roar. "It's best to keep your fate in your own hands." The hammer came crashing down. Yi Zichen swung his hammer, his explosive strength rippling the air below him. "Star-Lord Yi, Yi." Everyone present paled in shock. They all stared at Yi Zichen's position, their hearts in their throats. Emperor Hades, Su Yun, stepped through the air and shot towards Yi Zichen. In Shang, Go Yuzhan, and Su Lu'er followed closely behind. Several elemental spirits also gathered towards his position, but when the light dissipated, they saw, "Fate should indeed be grasped in our own hands." Yi Zichen gently gripped the warhammer. The overgod's eyes were filled with terror. He tried to pull the warhammer back, but to no avail. "But at least you have to have the ability, right?" Puff! No one could see what had happened. All they saw was that the chest of the Lord God holding the heavy hammer had caved in. Golden blood spurted out of his mouth like golden rain. That resplendent godhead was also instantly covered in cracks, and it dimmed without any light. He glanced at the crack in the arena. The instant Yi Zichen's gaze landed on them, the outsider overgods, who'd wanted to take advantage of the chaos to escape, instinctively retreated back into the arena. "As I said, this is my kindness to you." Yi Zichen gently tossed the overgod out of the sky. The overgod didn't struggle at all as he plummeted straight to the ground. All the sovereigns who saw this couldn't help but feel a chill in their hearts. That was one of the strongest existences amongst them, yet he couldn't even last a single round against the epic Star-Lord. What exactly had the epic Star-Lord experienced in less than half a year for him to grow to this level? Killing that overgod was like killing a chicken to warn the monkeys. Every outsider overgod felt insecure. Even before the overgod's death, some of them had wanted to take control of their own fates and resist. Now, however, they put aside such thoughts. In front of them, there was only one path of survival. It was to survive in this arena. "Let's begin. My patience is limited, and so is my time. Stop making trouble for me." He suddenly turned around, and the arena flashed with light. To Yi Zichen, this battle was no longer worth watching. He'd never wanted to enjoy the final struggle of these hopeless cultivators. His goal was simple: to exhaust the god race's strength and to get Yale to come over. The universe's secret realm was still waiting for him. The great sage and Yang Jian were both in dire straits. He had to deal with everything as quickly as possible, then rush to the secret realm and fight alongside them. An hour passed in the blink of an eye. The entire Yao race watched as the god race over gods clashed, watched as they died one after another at the hands of their own clansmen. In this arena, it was as if they'd seen the truest form of human nature: plot, betrayal. They were willing to do anything to survive. This was a battle for survival, and it vividly displayed the inferiority of humans, or rather, all living creatures. If it weren't for this moment, the god race over gods might not even have known they were capable of such despicable acts. When the second-to-last godhead shattered, the overgod's eyes lost all color, and he fell from the sky above the flaming cage. The surviving overgod sat paralyzed on the ground, panting heavily, but his eyes shone with dazzling light. He'd survived. In this desperate battle, he had survived. This surviving overgod wasn't the strongest among them, but he displayed his inferiority to the fullest. In order to survive, he'd formed an alliance with someone else, gotten rid of his greatest threat, and then attacked his allies. The flame arena dispersed. Yi Zichen slowly approached, but the overgod stared at him vigilantly. "You've won. You can leave now." Contrary to the overgod's expectations, Yi Zichen didn't break the overgod's original rules and attack him. Instead, he really did disperse the arena and let the overgod leave. The overgod was delighted to have survived, but no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't bring himself to smile. He'd only survived by stepping over the corpses of others, including his own older brother. "Star-Lord Yi, I'll be back." The surviving overgod gnashed his teeth and took to the skies, but at that moment, Yi Zichen's gaze froze. Before the overgod could fly more than a few hundred meters down, the overgod's godhead shattered and fell from the sky. At the same time, Yi Zichen bit his finger and slammed it against the ground. The barrier was completed in an instant. At the same time, the sky above the barrier darkened, leaving only a tiny sliver of light. In that tiny sliver of light, Yi Zichen could see a black-robed Yale slowly walking toward Yi Zichen as if he were taking a flight of stairs. 1,000 meters away, the black-robed Yale laughed arrogantly. Chapter 1922. Killing Intent. Resentment. The pungent smell of fresh blood swirled around the God Emperor of Destruction. Yi Zichen could faintly see his black robes dripping with crimson blood. Only then did Yi Zichen notice that Yale's black robes were eerily black. It was a black that would only appear after being completely soaked in blood. From this, one could imagine how many lives Yale had taken before this. Yale's appearance made it seem as if the entire sky of the Area Yao region had collapsed. Thick, ink-black clouds seemed so close you could touch them if you stretched out your hand. The pressure the Yao experts felt was incomparable. Yi Zichen, who was maintaining the barrier, knit his brows. Right now, it seemed like his barrier was the only safe zone in the Yao region. Yi Zichen, who was maintaining the barrier, knit his brows. At the moment, it seemed like his barrier was the only safe zone in the Yao region. Yale landed in the sky and snorted. He glanced at the overgod Yi Zichen had just released, then killed. Yale landed in the sky and snorted softly. He glanced at the spot where the overgod Yi Zichen had just released, only to be obliterated by him, had landed. Most of them, or perhaps all of them, had never seen Yale's true face. However, based on everything he'd done, he seemed like one of the god race's adjudicators. And this adjudicator was truly ruthless to the point of chilling fear. However, from his various performances, he seemed like an adjudicator of the Outerium god race. And this adjudicator was truly ruthless to the point of making people's hearts turn cold. An overgod. The gods of the outside realm were elites among elites, but in his eyes, they were as insignificant as ants. He didn't ask any questions, nor did he listen to their explanations. Just because he'd been defeated, he'd ended his life. Such atrocities had never occurred, even when Zhou Wu of the epic god clan was in power. Not even in the billions of years of God, Yao, and demon realm history had seen such a thing. At the same time, a white handkerchief fell from the sky from Yale's position. Only then did everyone notice that he'd been wiping his hands. From his expression, it was as if touching the overgod's body was something utterly disgusting. The handkerchief fell to the ground. Yale chuckled and looked at Yi Zichen. "Star-Lord Yi, long time no see." "Yale." After a long while, Yi Zichen finally spoke up. He'd already warned himself countless times to remain calm. He absolutely couldn't let Yale catch even the slightest hint of his emotions. But as soon as she saw him, countless images involuntarily appeared in his mind, and his arms that were hanging by his sides clenched into fists uncontrollably. His tense body would tremble involuntarily. Anger. Yi Zichen found it hard to conceal his anger. It was like a raging inferno in his heart. This ball of flame seemed to want to incinerate heaven and earth, burning Yale into ashes. This kind of gaze was naturally noticed by Yale. He gently twisted his neck, which made a crisp creaking sound. He took a few steps forward and stopped half a meter away from the barrier. Everyone within the barrier felt their hearts tremble. Even the 4 auxiliary stars furrowed their brows. The 5 elemental fairies' gazes fell upon Yi Zichen's back. "It's been a long time since we last met. Star-Lord, Yi has actually grown to such a level." Outside, Yale was smiling benevolently, but anyone who looked at him would find his expression to be the opposite of his personality. He was obviously a villain, but he had to pretend to be a kind person. One could imagine the scene. To tell the truth, Star-Lord Yi, I've truly been friendly to your era. When I found out you were in a secret realm, I intentionally didn't attack your era right away. Now that you've returned, and you keep saying you want to see me, it seems you are in a secret realm. You've obtained good fortune. Yale narrowed his eyes and smiled. He wanted to step forward, but the barrier blocked his way. Star-Lord Yi, how about opening the barrier so we can have a proper chat? For better or for worse, we're old friends. What kind of hospitality is this to keep an old friend out? Besides, do you really think this barrier can stop me? Yale's palm gently landed on the barrier. Then, he flicked his finger at it. Buzz, from the point where Yale flicked his finger, a ripple spread across the entire barrier. Yi Zichen, who was inside the barrier, suddenly let out a muffled groan. He clenched his fists and gripped the ground, refusing to budge. However, the 5 elemental fairies beside him saw a hint of red on his lips. They glanced at him, then swallowed their words when Yi Zichen glanced back at them. Yi Zichen reached out and wiped the blood from the corner of his mouth. He really didn't need to maintain this barrier. To Yale, it was dispensable. The instant the barrier dissipated, Yale sensed a gust of demonic wind howl past. A black wind visible to the naked eye swept into the Yao territory, forcing the Yao experts to kneel involuntarily. However, this situation didn't last long. Rays of golden light appeared around Yi Zichen's body. They completely blocked Yale's demonic wind and protected the Yao behind him. Interesting. Yale tilted his head and smiled. You're about the same. Yi Zichen refused to back down. Just now, when Yale had flicked the barrier, it was enough to prove that they'd sensed each other. No wonder you were able to usurp the divine emperor's throne. You really are much stronger than before. Likewise, said Yale with a chuckle. Star-Lord Yi, do you want to fight me to the death? Since we're old friends, I'm willing to give you that chance. Yi Zichen shook his head. Then what do you mean? Even if all of you come at me together, you're no match for me. Why don't you go alone? You might have a 10% chance of winning. Or perhaps you can let that old man Lin take care of you. I've hated him for a long time now. He used the laws of heaven and earth to seal my divine sea. Just now, I left the land of the laws. That old man was lucky. He wasn't even in the land of the laws. The land of the laws. It had been destroyed. That was the only information Yi Zichen could gather. Lin Ru stood among the Yao experts, her eyes wide with terror. She clutched a jade scepter in her hand. It seemed she was contacting her clansmen. How could she possibly contact them? Yale's words were very clear. He'd just returned from the land of the laws. Given his personality, he destroyed everything wherever he went. How could the land of the laws have escaped unscathed? There was no time to lament. Calamity was upon them, and the myriad realms were all waiting for it. Yale's destruction was only a matter of time. Destruction might come late, but it wouldn't be absent. While they regretted the destruction of the land of the laws, it might already be upon their heads. Chapter 1923. Faced with the dilemma of choosing between the secret realm and the new era, Yi Zichen made his decision. Yi Zichen headed for the new era by himself. As for the advance guard, he'd left them behind. The way Yi Zichen saw it, they'd form a line of defense around Elder Lin. He didn't hope to repel the outsiders, but at the very least protect the entrance to the secret realm. Of course, all of this depended on their safety. That was what he hoped for, but the situation in the secret realm was far worse than he'd hoped. Warriors of the secret realm, your resistance is futile. The battle in the secret realm had long since ceased to take place around the palace. Elder Lin, the outsiders, and the experts of the new era retreated as they fought. By now, they were less than 3 kilometers away from the entrance. 3 days had passed since Yi Zichen had left the secret realm. These 3 days seemed to be the limit of what Elder Lin and the others could endure. Now that they'd passed this critical point, the Milky Way galaxy's experts were exhausted, both physically and mentally. The outsiders weren't mediocre. If they fought them, even a single exchange of blows could put them in dire straits. Thus, they had no choice but to give it their all. Even so, the Milky Way galaxy's experts were barely holding on to their lives. They wouldn't be killed. In truth, the other members of the outsiders were fine. What gave Elder Lin and the others the most headache-inducing headache was their high priest. Practically 90% of the Milky Way Alliance's attention was focused on him. If they weren't careful, he'd leave a mark on them. But now, their mental and physical exhaustion made it hard for them to maintain peak condition. Although they could take pills and use their willpower to keep themselves from collapsing, their movements and thoughts would inevitably be worse than they'd been before. As a result, the situation was completely one-sided. All the Milky Way Alliance could do was back off. At the entrance to the secret realm, the Milky Way Alliance's experts, it couldn't be said to be absolute. At the very least, Yang Jian and the other era experts, as well as a portion of the Outer Realm celestial race, had a strange thought in their hearts. They couldn't retreat any further. If they did, the entrance to the Milky Way galaxy's secret realm would be completely exposed to the outsiders. When that happened, they wouldn't be the only ones in danger, but the entire Milky Way galaxy. Furthermore, the Milky Way galaxy was in a state of war. The epic Star Lord, Yi Zichen, had already returned to deal with internal affairs. Elder Lin's mission was to ensure that the outsiders wouldn't cause trouble. He trusted that the epic Star Lord would be able to hold out until he returned to the secret realm. Little did they know that there were still people among a portion of the god race's chief gods who wanted to flee for their lives. The most important reason they came here was to seize the treasure. Now that they were facing such a powerful enemy, it was impossible for them to seize the treasure, and they did not want to die here. However, the arm could not twist the thigh. Most people decided not to retreat. Even if they wanted to retreat, they could not. Especially when he saw the soul gem being taken away by the universe's alien race. The formation that used the soul gem as the foundation, which took a large amount of manpower, resources, and time to set up, was easily broken by the other party, and the treasure that was obtained with great difficulty was taken away. Those sovereigns who had wanted to flee couldn't see any hope at all. They couldn't find any reason to stay here. 3 kilometers in front of the secret realm, Elder Lin and the various experts of the Milky Way galaxy laid down a barrier. In their current state, there was no way for them to continue fighting against the universe's alien races. All Elder Lin could do was use everyone's spiritual energy to lay down a barrier to ensure their safety, and buy them some time to catch their breaths and recover. It took a lot of energy. Unfortunately, when one was forced into a corner, the pressure in one's heart would cause one to feel uneasy. You might as well have left the soul gem in the hands of one of us. You just had to use it as the foundation of the formation. Great, now that the soul gem has been taken away, our only hope of turning the situation around has been destroyed. One of the God Race experts waved his hand. He roared angrily. The wounds on his head and shoulders were so deep that bones could be seen, while his arms and waist were covered in dry blood. He had also put in a lot of effort in this battle. Even though he wasn't optimistic about this battle, and was one of the people who wanted to retreat, he still gave it his all, or rather, used 200% of his strength. No one dared to hold back. This concerned their own lives, and no one would joke around with their own lives. The others within the barrier were similar to him, and some were even more seriously injured than him. Outside of them were the universe's alien races that were closing in on them step by step. The immense pressure in his heart made it hard for the god who had just spoken to catch his breath. He needed to vent. He needed to vent all the emotions in his heart. I really don't know what you guys are resisting here, and I can't understand what you're doing. Elder Lin, I believe you're an understanding person. Do we have any chance of winning against them? No. Since we don't, why did you bring us along? We're jumping into a fire pit. The god shouted angrily at Elder Lin. Normally, even if he was given the guts of a leopard, he wouldn't dare to do this to a law monarch. But now, the identity of both parties was no longer important. In the face of death, everyone was equal. No one could be superior to the other. Let's hurry up and retreat now. We can still live. We can't retreat. If we retreat, the entrance to the secret realm will be exposed. At that time, the entire Milky Way galaxy will be in danger. We can run for a while, but we can't run forever, Elder Lin said softly. Put away your pity. The god laughed when he heard this. Look at the situation, and you're still thinking about the Milky Way galaxy? You want to be a hero, but I don't. There are many people here who don't want to be a hero. You're the one who brought us to this point. The Milky Way galaxy? Then can you tell me why the Aristar Lord has disappeared? Hasn't he always been full of benevolence and morality? Why is he running faster than anyone else in a time of crisis like this? He's just a sanctimonious person. When he's fine, he's compassionate. But when something happens, he runs faster than anyone else. Another god snorted. Say that again. At almost the same time, Yang Jian and the great sage pressed their weapons against the god's neck and chest. The smell of gunpowder filled the entire barrier. What are you doing? Elder Lin glared at Yang Jian and the great sage, then snorted angrily at the foreign god. Star-Lord, he isn't as bad as you think. He's just going back to deal with more important matters. Once he's done, he'll naturally come and help us. What can be more important than the universe's aliens? To put it bluntly, he's just a coward. Chapter 1924. In the hearts of the over-gods who'd spoken, the word hope didn't even exist. It seemed like they were using the most vicious of words to attack Yi Zichen's character and destroy his image in everyone else's hearts. Little did they know, this was also their resentment for their own future. They couldn't see any possibility at all. They couldn't see even the slightest hint of a future. In their eyes, the future was pitch black. In truth, it wasn't that the heavens didn't give them a way out. They could have run once. When the outsiders obtained soul gems, that was the Milky Way Alliance's last chance of leaving the secret realm. However, their leader, Elder Lin, had given up on that opportunity. Now that they'd lost it, they'd never get another. Now, right before their eyes, they resented their own lives. The shadow of death loomed over them, and the pressure of being unable to struggle nearly caused them to break down emotionally. They no longer cared. Who cared if he was the Lord of the Epic or the King of the Laws? In the face of death, everyone was equal. They'd feared the Lord of the Stars and Elder Lin because of their positions. Now that they were about to die, what was there to be afraid of? At most, they die. Full of benevolence, righteousness, and morals, he treats the world as his own responsibility. When the outsiders appeared, he fled faster than anyone else, leaving us to die as scapegoats. This Lord of the Stars is really... Shut up. Whoosh. A blur flashed past, and the over-god felt a chill run down his neck. Yang Jian walked out of the dark blur and pressed the tip of his three-pointed, double-edged sword against the over-god's neck. The sharp blade had already pierced through the skin of his neck, and golden blood slowly flowed down along the blade. None of the sovereigns had any time to react to this sudden attack. He had no means of defense. So long as Yang Jian willed it, he could separate the over-god's head from his neck. The other over-gods, standing on the over-god's side, knit their brows. Just as they were about to attack, an iron staff blocked their way. Then they saw the great sage's eyes flash with ferocious, killing intent. What do you think you're doing? Get out of my way. At that moment, Elder Lin sat on the ground and roared in anger. You're so energetic, yet you're using it on the outsiders. What's the point of acting like a tyrant here? No matter what, Elder Lin still had status and prestige in the Alliance. The great sage stiffened his neck and continued to extend his staff. Only when the overgods retreated did he glare at them viciously and retract his staff. The furious Yang Jian took a deep breath and slowly sheathed his saber. However, when Yang Jian retracted his blade, he continued to stare at the overgod. Yi Zi is not the kind of person you think he is. Apologize to him. Apologize? The chief god wiped the fresh blood from his neck. At this level, his self-healing ability was naturally superb. In just a few seconds, the wound that Yang Jian's blade had made healed. There was only a thin white line that was hard to notice if one didn't look carefully. He curled the corners of his mouth and narrowed his eyes. His tongue kept licking around in his mouth, and soon after, he lightly touched the ground. He took a deep breath. Why should I apologize? Did I say something wrong? Seeing that Yang Jian was about to fly into a rage again, the chief god sighed and smiled. He pushed his hands forward, indicating for Yang Jian to calm down. Don't be so angry. I'm really not slandering him. I'm just stating the facts. At a time like this, there's no need to hide anything. so I'll just tell you this. When we were preparing to attack your era, we investigated it from every angle. We investigated it thoroughly. Among them, Yi Zichen was our primary target, and you. The chief god pointed at Yang Jian, and the great sage, his eyes narrowed. Due to your relationship with Yi Zichen, we investigated you as well. Let's put it this way. You two are actually two immortal officials from the lower realm's heavenly palace, and you met Yi Zichen through some sort of communication tool. Am I right? You hit it off with Yi Zichen the moment you met him, and because of everything that happened between you became close friends. You treated Yi Zichen as your leader and did everything you could for him. In fact, you gritted your teeth and did everything you couldn't. Then, may I ask, what has he done for you? As soon as he said that, Yang Jian and the great sage sneered and retorted without even thinking about it. However, before they could say anything, the overgod pushed them back down their throats and snorted. You want to say a lot, or perhaps you want to say that your brotherly relationship doesn't need to fuss over such things. If you want to use words to destroy our relationship, there's no need for that. Yang Jian looked at the overgod contemptuously, his lips twisted in disdain. Our friendship with Yi Zichen isn't something you can break with just a few words. I'm not saying I want to break it. I just want you to see him for who he is. The overgod shook his head. Based on our calculations, you've almost lost your lives for Yi Zichen 6 times. 6 of those times, Yi Zichen had the right to choose whether to live or die with you. However, only once out of those 6 times did he choose to stand by your side. He chose to stand on your side. The other 5 times, he chose to save his woman and his confidant, abandoning you. And that was the only time when his lover was with you. Think back carefully. I trust you all remember, if everything was as I said Yi Zichen. Between his women and his brothers, he abandoned you without the slightest hesitation. Just like now, he forgot about you and went back to his women. I really don't know what bewitching drug he gave you to make you give up so easily. Follow him wholeheartedly and throw your lives away for him. The barrier suddenly fell silent. Whether it was the god races over gods or the first era experts, they all fell silent. They looked at the silent Yang Jian and the great sage. Their eyes flickered, their eyes lowered, and their arms trembled. If all of this was true, even outsiders could tell that. What exactly did Yang Jian and the great sage hold in Yi Zichen's heart? To them, their brotherly relationship was even more important than their lives. But to Yi Zichen, it was dispensable. Who would be able to accept such a drastic difference? It seems you understand now. I've said so much because I want you to see exactly what kind of person he is. Don't be kept in the dark even though I... Shut up, huh? When the overgod heard that, he froze, then watched as Yang Jian slowly opened his eyes, which glowed with pitch-black light. His sinister gaze sent shivers down the spines of the onlookers. Even the overgod couldn't help but take a step back. A step. At the same time, the great sage looked up and met Yang Jian's gaze. Even so, we still believe him. He's still our brother. If you dare say one more bad word about him. Chapter 1925. Sometimes, for some people, the relationship between brothers was a mysterious and miraculous thing. You didn't need to pay an equivalent price. You might not even be the first to appear when he needed you. But so long as you needed him, he'd stand by your side unconditionally and trust in your every decision. To Yang Jian and the great sage, that was their relationship with Yi Zichen. There was no need for superfluous words. Even a look of tacit understanding would be a waste. The mere mention of Yi Zichen's name was enough for them to give up everything. Besides, everything the outsider overgod had just said was nothing more than a psychological attack. He was right. Most of the time, Yi Zichen chose to save his women, but that didn't mean he was ignoring them. It just so happened that the world's living beings were there. Of these choices, if it were them, they hoped Yi Zichen would make the same choice. Besides, this was a sign of Yi Zichen's trust in them. He trusted that Yang Jian and the great sage wouldn't disappoint him. He trusted that they'd hold out until he'd taken care of everything. Yang Jian and the great sage absolutely wouldn't let him down. They absolutely wouldn't disappoint him. As for the fact that Yi Zichen hadn't done anything for them, Yang Jian and the great sage only wanted to say one thing to him. You know shit. There was no need for any further words. When Yang Jian's words, which also represented the great sage's thoughts, rang out in everyone's ears, the over-god who had been so pleased with himself at the start, and had been so pleased with himself because of what he had said, his entire face turned pale. His expression froze. He couldn't imagine why. Even after everything he'd said, neither of them had a single word of complaint. Just what kind of curse had the era Lord of the Stars cast on them for them to trust him this much? The other outsider, over-gods, and era lords were stunned for a long while. Little did they know, even Gu Xuanda was shocked by Yi Zichen's actions. He couldn't help but feel indignant for Yang Jian and the great sage. However, after hearing Yang Jian's words, he stared blankly for a moment, then laughed self-deprecatingly. It seemed he'd fallen for Yi Zichen's tricks too. Although he hadn't interacted with Yi Zichen for long, he was actually quite easy to see through. He was loyal. Sometimes he wasn't very decisive and was overcautious. He would always think too much and care more about the interests of others. How could a person who would treat strangers with absolute fairness be as deplorable as the foreign realm master god had described? In the simplest sense, the celestial race's celestial emperor Zhou Wu was the best example. At first, Yi Zichen couldn't even be compared to Zhou Wu at all. But why was it that as time went on, the entire god realm, and even the entire era, was tilting in Yi Zichen's favor? In the end, only the divine arbiter remained by Zhou Wu's side. This was a classic example of a just cause enjoys abundant support, while an unjust cause finds little support. Perhaps Yi Zichen's disguise could deceive one or two people, but he couldn't deceive millions of eyes. So many great thearchs and races were standing on his side. It was definitely not because of his identity as the Star Lord that he could transcend. She was more impressed by his character and the way he dealt with people. If not, why didn't anyone change sides when Zhou Wu transcended in the end? Don't test my patience anymore, got it? At the same time, Yang Jian pressed his three-pointed, double-edged blade against the god's neck. Consider this a warning to you. If you say one more thing about Yi Zi, your head really is going to part ways with you. I'm saying goodbye to you, okay? It was as if he could see a howling tempest in Yang Jian's eyes. The foreign realm master god held his breath, but didn't dare exhale. He could sense the killing intent in Yang Jian's eyes. Furthermore, he sensed the darkness emanating from Yi Zichen's body. It was as if a bloodthirsty Azura had emerged from the depths of hell. He couldn't imagine it. Even though he was an imperial emperor, there was still an insurmountable gulf between him and the foreign realm master gods. Gu Xuanda and Qing Li were half-step transcendence cultivators. And that was one thing, but why were Yang Jian and the great sage emperors so powerful? They could release this sort of pressure. Especially Yang Jian. He'd never felt such a bloodthirst before. This was only natural. Yang Jian wasn't just an imperial emperor. He was the heir to the Star of Slaughter, one of the myriad stars. Since the beginning of the new era, the Star of Slaughter's role had been to hunt in the darkness. He'd purged all threats from the Emperor Star's path, and the amount of blood he'd stained his hands couldn't be measured in numbers. Yang Jian hadn't killed many people. In the third era, Yi Zichen hadn't ascended to the position of Emperor Star by trampling over mountains of corpses and seas of blood. However, Yang Jian had inherited the Star of Slaughter's legacy. His bloodthirsty killing intent emanated from his very bones and was impossible to erase. Instinctively, the foreign realm master god took half a step back and almost fell to the ground. In response, Yang Jian merely sneered but didn't press any further. He retracted his three-pointed, double-edged blade, looked around, and waved it in a circle. And the rest of you? Yang Jian pointed at the other master gods, a cold smile tugging at his lips. Fan the flames. If I hear you again, you'll end up worse than him. The other master gods kept quiet out of fear. It was hard to imagine that the first era's emperor could intimidate so many master gods of the outside realm. From Elder Lin's expression, it seemed he didn't want to stand on the outside realm master god side either. The master gods could only grit their teeth and swallow their pride. Shouldn't we discuss a countermeasure? This barrier won't last much longer. The outsiders haven't appeared yet, so I think it's more likely that it's not that the barrier can't be broken, but rather that they're studying the soul gem's effects. Use them. If we wait for them to finish their research, we'll have to go back to running for our lives. We can't retreat any further, so let's. The speaker was Qing Li's younger brother, one of the more outstanding leaders of the Qing family's younger generation. Between the forces of the God race and Ji Yuan, with Qing Li's existence, his relationship with Ji Yuan was closer. That was why, while the other master gods were too embarrassed to say anything, he could speak up without a care in the world. The crowd fell silent. This was indeed a problem. In truth, to them, the outsiders were easy to deal with. The main problem was the High Priestess. The High Priestess was the one who worried the entire Milky Way alliance. Even at their peak, they'd had a hard time gaining an advantage over the High Priestess. Now that they'd expended a great deal of energy, it was hard for them to return to peak condition. If they fought the High Priestess now, waiting here is just waiting for death. Chapter 1926. Her dazzling golden armor was armed to the teeth. Only his eyes were exposed, revealing his determination to repel the enemy. Everyone paled in shock. In the previous confrontation with the Protoss, the war goddess had been the main attacker and had been at the forefront of the battle. Her strength was the most severe among them. The reason the Milky Way Alliance had retreated to this extent, giving up on the soul gems and gathering everyone's strength to support the defensive barrier, was partly to let the war goddess recover from her injuries. No one expected that the heavily injured goddess of war would recover so quickly. While everyone else had yet to fully recover from their mental fatigue, her aura and realm seemed to be several levels higher than before. At this time, she had completely surpassed the level of a core god. With the realm of the extraterritorial core gods, they could no longer tell how strong she was. She gave off the feeling that she was like the god king they had served before, but her aura was even more profound and unfathomable. God king? The extraterritorial core gods didn't dare to think about it. In their eyes, the God King was already high and mighty. Jumping 2 realms in one go was too shocking. Unbeknownst to them, while the extraterritorial core gods were shocked, Elder Lin, the king of the laws, was shocked to the extreme. His shock wasn't because of the war goddess's sudden increase in realm. It was because Elder Lin pointed at the war goddess, the corners of his mouth twitching violently. He couldn't say anything, but he quickly retracted his hand just as he stretched out his hand. It was as if the finger he stretched out was extremely disrespectful to the war goddess. After this, he wanted to apologize for her even more. He almost knelt on the ground to apologize for his actions. A wisp of gentle energy was quietly released by the war goddess beside Elder Lin. Then, the war goddess' gentle smile appeared in Elder Lin's consciousness. Do you believe me now? I will definitely stand on the Milky Way's side. The shock on Elder Lin's face had reached an extreme level. He stared at the war goddess's golden armor, his gaze filled with respect. Then, his gaze subtly landed on the phoenix on her shoulder. The phoenix's image was extremely lifelike, as if it was a real phoenix. Occasionally, one could even see the phoenix spreading its wings or blinking its eyes. When one took a closer look, one would realize that this was just the phoenix's image. Everything before was just an illusion. Unbeknownst to them, this phoenix was indeed a pattern, and it was indeed alive. Inside the phoenix pattern, it had the complete soul of a phoenix. As for this phoenix insignia that shocked Elder Lin to the point of speechlessness, it represented the Phoenix Army. It was one of the 6 godly armies under the Milky Way Master. He had followed the Master of the Milky Way for billions of years and had never tasted defeat. The only defeat was the encirclement and annihilation of the Milky Way by other galaxies. The 6 god armies were annihilated in order to protect the Milky Way. Golden armor. It was the symbol of a general. In other words, the golden armored war goddess with a phoenix circling on her shoulder plate was the general of the Phoenix Army of the 6 god armies. Elder Lin was just the gatekeeper of the Milky Way Master. In front of the general of the 6 god army, he had to kneel and pay his respects. I reincarnated. The goddess of war's voice was very soft. Just this sentence alone caused tears to flow uncontrollably from Elder Lin's eyes. Fortune of the Milky Way. Fortune of the Milky Way. Elder Lin had never imagined that he would hear such news in his twilight years. The reincarnation of the general of the 6 god armies. This was something he didn't even dare to think about before. Lucky, the war goddess seemed to be talking to herself as she smiled. However, there was an indescribable sadness in her tone. She reincarnated. She was the only lucky one among the 6 generals to reincarnate. However, she was the only one who knew that her reincarnation was not luck. This was an opportunity that her 5 brothers fought for with their souls shattered. 30 million years of sleep. She reincarnated into the body of the war goddess of the Milky Way galaxy. When she first awakened the memory of the Phoenix Army's leader, she was silent for a long time, regardless of how shocking this memory was to her. Or perhaps it was the pain she felt when her brothers sacrificed for her. She didn't know what to do. After that, she came into contact with the Emperor God and Elder Lin. From their memories, she knew that these 2 used to be the gatekeepers of the Milky Way Master. At that time, she vaguely guessed some things, but she didn't say anything. She quietly used the memory of her past life to improve her strength, waiting for the day she could reappear beside the Milky Way Master. For the Milky Way galaxy, for her 5 brothers to avenge her. In order to prevent others from noticing, she even intentionally sealed most of her power. All of this was to give her enemies a head-on blow. She wanted them to be caught off guard. She wanted them to never imagine that the former Phoenix Army's leader would reincarnate and appear in front of them. In front of them. Not only her, she also had Yi Zichen, who the Milky Way galaxy had nurtured, to fight alongside the Milky Way Master. Unfortunately, man proposes, God disposes. The appearance of the Central Secret Realm messed up all of the war goddess's plans. The appearance of the aliens forced her to overturn her plans of the past tens of thousands of years. At the critical moment of the Milky Way galaxy's survival, she couldn't just sit back and do nothing. She continued to bury her head in her desire for revenge. She couldn't erase her desire to avenge her 5 brothers, but as a general of the Milky Way galaxy, she should prioritize the future of the Milky Way galaxy. The lucky one of the Central Secret Realm. Right at this moment, an untimely and arrogant voice rang out in everyone's ears. All of a sudden, the expressions of the Milky Way Alliance experts within the barrier darkened as they looked at the aliens outside. In the middle of them was the High Priestess, who was still playing with the soul gem that once belonged to the Milky Way galaxy. Surrender. This barrier of yours cannot withstand the attacks of our High Priestess. Our High Priestess is merciful and can forgive your previous crimes as long as you bring us to the entrance of the secret realm. This is too much. Everyone was infuriated. These universe outsiders didn't even put them in their eyes. The great sage and Yang Jian raised their weapons and stepped forward. They were afraid of death, but there were more important things than that. For example, dignity and loyalty. However, the war goddess had already signaled Elder Lin to disperse the barrier. Clad in golden armor, she slowly walked several dozen meters away from the aliens. The High Priestess couldn't help but stare at the golden armor for a long time. Not long later, her eyes were filled with astonishment. You, Erhua, it's been so long. You've finally risen from being a petty officer to the position of the High Priestess. It wasn't easy. Chapter 1927. The foreign races in the surrounding universe were puzzled. Even among his own race, some of them didn't know the High Priest's name. They had always referred to him as such. Only a few of the more experienced ones knew the High Priest's name. When they heard the war goddess say his name, their eyes were filled with astonishment. They didn't know how the war goddess knew, nor did they understand the High Priest's expression. Golden armor, an eye-catching symbol of a mythical beast. The High Priest's pupils constricted, and he couldn't make a sound for a long time. He was the High Priest of the Outsiders. He was one of the oldest members of his race. The clansmen who followed him probably didn't know what this golden armor with the pattern of a mythological beast represented. To him, it was like a nightmare. How is this possible? After a long while, the high priest stared at the war goddess, staring at the phoenix symbol on her shoulder. He couldn't help but mutter to himself. The leader of the Phoenix army, the leaders of the 6 godly armies of the Milky Way had all died in battle. He had been there in that battle. He had seen the 6 godly armies being annihilated by the universe's galaxies. It was the destruction of the 6 godly armies that signaled the universe alliance to destroy the Milky Way. If not for that, who would dare challenge the Milky Way's authority? Someone whose soul had been scattered had appeared in front of him again. Your Excellency, what are you talking about? How is this possible? The outsiders muttered. The high priest ignored them and continued to stare at the phoenix on the war goddess' shoulder. Monkey, am I seeing things? Yang Jian rubbed his eyes and bumped the great sage with his shoulder. The Milky Way alliance was the closest to the war goddess. You're right. Yang Jian didn't say anything, but the great sage understood what he wanted to say and nodded solemnly. That high priest's expression is one of fear. Fear. The high priest, who had single-handedly beaten the entire alliance into a retreat, was now looking at the war goddess with fear. He hit it well, but the great sage, who had the celestial eye and the fiery eyes of truth, saw it clearly. The trembling of his eyes and the trembling of his fingers were all evidence of his fear. The goddess of war had also participated in the previous battle. At that time, the high priest did not show any fear towards the war goddess. His fear, it was the golden armor on her body. Impossible, absolutely impossible. After watching for a long time, the high priest shook his head vigorously, looking as if he had gone mad. Not long after, he laughed wildly. You want to deceive me with such a disguise? It seems like you've obtained quite a lot of treasures. If you hand them over to me, I can spare your lives. Have you forgotten how you got to this position in the first place? You dare to boast about your original body? The war goddess interrupted the high priest's words with a smile. You should remember very clearly that I was the one who killed your 6 high priests. Do you really think you can do that? With your status and talent back then? Do you think you have the chance to sit in this position in this lifetime? As soon as he said that, the goddess of war glanced at him with a look of disdain and smiled. You should thank me for clearing the obstacles in front of you and for not killing you back then. Tremble. As soon as the war goddess finished speaking, as soon as her gaze appeared, the high priest couldn't stop trembling as if he was suffering from a fever. How could he forget? Back then, the Phoenix general of the 6 god armies was right in front of him, less than 100 meters away from her. She single-handedly killed multiple high priests of her race. One had to know that the high priest had millions of Universe Alliance experts protecting him. She still took their heads as easily as taking something out of her pocket. After killing all of them, it was this gaze, that disdainful gaze. At that time, her face was still stained with the blood of the high priests. Her demonic eyes shone with an arrogant light. With a sneer, she glanced at him. She left right in front of him. At that time, she was less than 100 meters away from him. He would never forget that scene. Even now, when he thought about it, he would tremble all over. It really was her. There was no mistake. Just from that gaze, the high priest was sure that the war goddess in front of him was the Phoenix general back then. She was back. She had reincarnated. If that was the case, didn't that mean that the other high priests had also reincarnated? It was even more likely that they were among these people. Quick, send a message back to the clan. Ask the king to come personally. The high priest roared like a madman. The clansmen around him were so shocked by his actions that they couldn't understand what was going on. Hurry! Even a second of delay was torture for the high priest. Seeing that the clansmen beside him didn't send the message immediately, the high priest's eyes turned red. Yes, the clansmen didn't dare to delay any longer. They hurried to send the message. However, those who didn't send the message all looked terrified. I can't send it. Everyone was shocked. Immediately, the high priest looked at the war goddess. It's you. Of course it's me. The war goddess smiled and nodded. You are the first outsider to enter the central secret realm. You will also be the only outsider to enter this place. You should be regretting your decision. Actually, when the treasure is unearthed, there is no need for you, the high priest, to come personally. It was your greed that wanted to profit from it. However, your greed led to the end of your life. I'll let you go once. However, you didn't cherish it and send it to me. It seems like this is your fate. If I want to leave, no one can stop me." The high priest roared angrily as he stood up. From the looks of it, he didn't want to bother with his subordinates anymore. He wanted to leave this place on his own. Huh. The war goddess only laughed softly. Then, she turned around to look at Yang Jian and the great sage. "I'll leave these people to you. Is that okay?" "Of course it's okay." Yang Jian patted his chest loudly. "Just these smelly fish and prawns? I didn't bring my dog with me. Otherwise, I could have taken care of them myself. Is it okay to let that guy go?" The great sage asked. "He can't escape." Before he could finish his sentence, a shadow appeared in the void like a falling comet. The high priest's clothes were tattered, and his hair was messy as he stared at the war goddess. "You really think I'm afraid of you?" "I don't know if I'm afraid or not. All I know is that as long as I don't die, you won't be able to leave my battlefield." As he spoke, the phoenix on the war goddess's shoulder suddenly soared into the sky. A bright phoenix cry filled the sky. Chapter 1928. Before he even finished speaking, the Milky Way Alliance felt a push that pushed them back a few hundred meters. The same went for the outsiders. It was as if the battlefield had been cleared. Only the High Priestess and the War Goddess remained between the two factions. "We can't get in." The great sage reached out. The space in front of them was completely sealed. Even brute force couldn't break in. "This is a death match." Right at this moment, Elder Lin sighed deeply, and his eyes were filled with worry. The Phoenix Army's leader. The moment the deathmatch arena appeared, Elder Lin completely believed in the war goddess's identity. She was the Phoenix Army's leader. The deathmatch arena was the Phoenix Army's famous technique. It trapped the enemy within the arena. Only when there was only one person left alive would the lockdown be broken. Back when the Milky Way was still the strongest galaxy in the universe, the Phoenix Army's leader used this deathmatch to trap 3 million enemy soldiers. No matter how hard they struggled, they couldn't escape. In the end, only one leader survived. Even so, in the intense battle in the arena, the Phoenix Army's general had sustained severe injuries, and he had died a few seconds after leaving the arena. The Phoenix Army's leader became famous because of this battle. Everyone in the universe was scared out of their wits. However, Elder Lin had never heard of the Phoenix Army's leader personally entering the deathmatch. "She's duel. How bold." Yang Jian and the great sage couldn't help but praise. To be honest, if the two of them had to face the high priestess alone, they had the courage to fight, but they didn't have the courage to fight to the death. Putting his own life and death on the line, this kind of courage really made them admire him. Since that's the case, we can't fall behind either. We'll leave the high priestess to the war goddess. None of these small fries can escape. The great sage raised the Rui Jingu Bang and charged at the outsiders. The other experts, and even the foreign god, didn't hesitate. To them, the high priestess was an insurmountable mountain, but if this mountain was flattened, all that was left behind was a plain. Elder Lin didn't move, his gaze fixed on the arena. He was truly worried about the war goddess' safety. Even though she was the reincarnation of the Phoenix Army's general, no one knew how much of her power she had recovered. If he was at his peak, he wouldn't even give him a second look. He was afraid that the Phoenix Army's general's strength hadn't recovered yet, so she had stubbornly pushed forward, ruining her reincarnation. "Stop looking. We should believe in her, right?" Yang Jian walked to Elder Lin's side, patted his shoulder a few times, and comforted him. At this moment, his third eye had already opened, and the Erlang lance in his hand buzzed incessantly, brimming with battle intent. With that, Yang Jian raised his lance and stood shoulder to shoulder with the great sage. Elder Lin remained where he was and gently closed his turbid eyes. It was as if he was praying for the Phoenix Army commander. After that, he resolutely charged towards the outer races of the universe, no longer harboring any other thoughts. Phoenix Army commander. The high priest's eyes were filled with madness as he stared at the goddess of war, whose robes were fluttering in the wind. He was like this because the fear in his heart made it hard for him to calm down. The fear that had once been imprinted in the depths of his soul wasn't something that time could erase. Even if time could make him forget, the moment the Phoenix Army commander appeared before him, memories of the past flashed before his eyes, as if it had happened yesterday. You've already died once, yet you're still acting like a tyrant here. Do you really think I'm afraid of you? The high priest puffed out his chest and spread his arms, using exaggerated movements to hide the torment and unease in his heart. He roared with all his might. Even though his throat cracked, he didn't dare attack the goddess of war. Is there a need? In contrast to the high priest's anxiety, the goddess of war merely stood in the center of the arena and smiled lightly. I believe that you recognize this place. Or rather, when you returned, you already knew. This is my arena of life and death. Between the two of us, only one will live and the other will die. The living will leave and the dead will stay. There is no other choice. Choose. I. The high priest's lips trembled slightly. Of course, he knew that this was the arena of life and death. Otherwise, he wouldn't be this shocked. But the arena of life and death was far too infamous. This increased the pressure on the high priest several times over. Come on. The goddess of war clearly didn't want to waste any more time, nor did she want to use the high priest's mental pressure to give her an advantage. She chuckled and stretched out her hand. If you want to leave, then beat me, or I'll beat you. The Yao realm of the era. Yale's arrival multiplied the pressure on the Yao experts. If it weren't for Yi Zichen's presence, even if they used all their strength, including the 4 great auxiliary stars, they still wouldn't be able to gain any advantage over him. No, it wasn't that they didn't have an advantage. It was that they had no hope of survival. Yale and Yi Zichen's hostile confrontation had been stopped by Yi Zichen's words. Up in the sky, Yi Zichen stared intently at Yale's position. As for Yale, he fell silent, speechless. For a full hour, the Yao experts hung in the air above the Yao realm. The numerous Demon Clan experts below did not even dare to breathe loudly during this 1 hour. They were truly afraid that even their breathing might break the balance of silence. After a while, Yale grunted in agreement. When Yi Zichen heard that, he looked over in Yale's direction. At that moment, Yale spoke up. Is that true? I have no reason to lie to you, said Yi Zichen seriously. Yale nodded, then fell silent. Yi Zichen, who was already impatient, furrowed his brows deeply. At that moment, whoosh, 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 a rain of swords tore through the air. The outside, an army of Outlander gods, exclaimed one of the Yao experts with eye powers. When Yi Zichen heard that, he looked over. Among the vast number of extraterritorial celestials, there are also quite a number of extraterritorial beings. Some of them are experts from other planes that I've just recruited. Yale smiled in a very understanding manner. What about me? You can't really think I have feelings for them, right? I'll tell you the truth. I only fancied their godheads back then. My godhead is almost full, and I already have the best choice in mind. You think I'd give up on destroying your era and save them? What a joke. Chapter 1929. The Upheaval Alliance Headquarters. The entire chaotic city was filled with injured people. Countless doctors were shuttling through the streets and alleys, judging the severity of the patient's injuries and treating them accordingly. The Upheaval Alliance didn't hesitate in the slightest. The pills were continuously delivered to the hands of the doctors, who would decide on the usage rights of the pills. Fortunately, Star-Lord Yi sent you here in time. At this time, when the demand for beds was particularly high, there were many people surrounding a bed. Lying on the bed was an old man with scars all over his body. His hair was as white as snow, and his entire face was like the withered bark of an old tree. His eyes were cloudy, and his pupils were gray. The old man laughed when he heard this. However, his laughter was weak and powerless. When everyone heard his laughter, they couldn't help but sigh softly. Their eyes were filled with sorrow and sorrow. Qian Ling and the others, suddenly, the atmosphere in the room changed. Even though no one answered, the old man on the bed could guess what was going on. According to our deduction, the Jade Lake Palace Master and the others should be in the god race. The one who spoke was the Upheaval Alliance's steward, Xiao Yan. He took a deep breath and clenched his fists. They're definitely in the God Realm. We've searched everywhere we could. The God Realm is the only place we haven't been. Is that so? The old man closed his eyes and did not speak. However, the scene that he regretted the most replayed in his head. That day, their allies, the Outsiders, had come to the Epic Era. Many of the Upheaval Alliance's stewards and experts went out to greet them. No one would have thought that the foreign realm Master God, who had been chatting and laughing with them, would suddenly launch an attack. The great powers of the era, who were caught off guard, were all caught off guard. He was the only one who escaped and sent a message to the new era. After that, he gathered all the forces he could muster and prepared to head over to the enemy's rescue. Alas, when he rushed over, the enemy had already left, and what awaited him was an endless horde of extraterrestrial gods. They fought and retreated. They fought all the way to the Sea of Innocence. He hated it. One had to know that Xiao Yumei, the Zhao sisters, and the Fox Empress were among those who had gone to welcome them. As for him, the old man in front of him looked like a lamp about to run out of oil. He was none other than the Northern Divine Mountains Emperor, the Sea Emperor, Shuiyang. No one wanted to see him end up like this. However, their reinforcements were still a bit too late. By the time Yi Zichen arrived at the Sea of Innocence, Shuiyang had already exhausted too much of his life force. Everyone had done their best to stay alive. Yi Zichen, well aware of the era's current situation, didn't stay either. After settling the God Clan's war, he immediately went to the Monster Clan. Until now, he might not even know that Xiao Yumei had been captured. Daddy. At this moment, a young girl ran in. She was the Sea of Innocence's third princess, Bei Bei. She'd been staying with the Upheaval Alliance this entire time. Seeing her arrival, everyone in the room was startled. Everyone had kept the Ocean Empress' three princesses a secret so that they wouldn't receive any news about her. Father, Bei Bei ran over to the bed with tears in her eyes. Even though the Ocean Emperor had become like this, she was still able to immediately recognize that the old man on the bed was her father. The Ocean Sovereign also reached out and hugged him out of habit. Then, Bibi said, "Don't worry. Father, the sisters said that they know where Auntie is and want to save her." In an instant, everyone in the room was stunned. The Ocean Sovereign, who was lying on the bed, suddenly got up and got off the bed with an inexplicable strength. Nonsense! Hurry up and stop them. However, just as they were about to head out and intercept Xue Honghong and Xue Momo, reporting, a long, resonant shout exploded in everyone's ears. This is bad. The Outlanders are attacking again. This time. The messenger's lips were pale and trembling uncontrollably. Xiao Yan reached out and pushed aside the curtains, only to see a vast expanse of darkness. They'd gone too far. Boom! Xiao Yan's aura erupted, and he burst through the window. The others followed closely behind. Before long, no one called out to them. People soared into the sky from all directions of the city. Among these people, there were many who were still in the midst of treatment. There was no need for words. The Outerium God Race's actions and his actions had long touched the bottom line of the era. Their grievances had long since reached the point where they didn't need to communicate. Only kill. The Ocean Emperor's injuries prevented him from rushing to the scene as quickly as Xiao Yan and the others had. In truth, it was best for him to stay and recuperate. He'd overdrawn his life force. If he went out now, he'd be risking his life. Xue Bei Bei froze in fear. The Upheaval Alliance was the safest place for the gods. Although it had been attacked before, the current situation. Don't be afraid. The Ocean Emperor gazed lovingly at Xue Bei Bei, then gently patted her on the head with his large, warm hand. During this time, the Ocean Emperor used his other hand to remove the silver needles from his body. These needles had been inserted to prevent his life force from draining away. As soon as they were removed, his body visibly deteriorated. He donned his armor. His form-fitting armor now seemed a little loose. Bei Bei, just stay here and don't go anywhere, okay? Daddy will bring my sisters and your Annie Chinling back safely. Daddy, Bebe seemed to remember something. He clenched the Ocean Emperor's armor, unwilling to let go. Do you believe me? I do. I do. Bebe's eyes glistened with tears. In my eyes, Daddy is a great hero. I believe you. Then you'll wait for me here, okay? The Ocean Empress smiled gently. Bebe bit his lip and nodded under the Ocean Emperor's gaze. But then, she stuck out her pinky finger. Pinky swear. Huh? The Ocean Emperor didn't understand. Pinky swear. Bebe said, you have to promise me that you'll come back. I still want to ride a big horse. Okay. Pinky swear. The Ocean Emperor nodded solemnly and put her finger on the little finger. Daddy's leaving. She took a deep breath and walked to the door. Bebe bit her lip, trying hard not to cry, until the door slammed shut. Daddy. Bebe ran to the door with bloodshot eyes, only to find that the Ocean Emperor had already sealed it. She hammered the door, but the Ocean Emperor was standing right outside. Tears welled up in the corners of her eyes, then faded away. The Ocean Emperor calmed down and touched her forehead. As her fingertip brushed past, a mark appeared on her forehead. The Ocean Emperor closed her eyes and murmured. Chapter 1930. The sounds of battle rang out incessantly. The entire void of Chaos City was completely occupied by the alien races. Not only were there gods from the god race, there were also quite a number of alien races. The experts of Upheaval City took to the skies. Without a word, they charged at the outsider invaders, risking their lives. Xiao Yin and the other Upheaval Alliance leaders fought on the front lines. Dark red. No, it wasn't just dark red blood. There were so many races and so much blood that it painted Upheaval City into a multicolored painting. However, this painting was different from all the others. It represented war. Roar. Suddenly, an azure dragon roared. A soul-stirring dragon roar resounded through the sky, causing the battle between both sides to solidify. Everyone looked up at the sky. Above their heads was a water dragon made entirely out of water, roaring as it flew through the air. It opened its mouth wide. The roaring water dragon instantly swallowed up hundreds of gods. No one knew where they'd gone. All they knew was that once they'd been swallowed up, they vanished without a trace. Among the outsider armies, the commanders couldn't help but frown. They had to admit this intimidating attack made them feel pressured. Ocean Emperor! Ocean Emperor! Ocean Emperor! The Upheaval Alliance leaders cried out in alarm. The moment that vigorous water dragon roared out, they knew who it was. Before long, they saw. The Ocean Emperor stood proudly in the sky, clad in armor and wearing a crown. He grasped his Neptune's war halberd. From the outside, no one could tell that he was dressed in armor. At this moment, he was still awe-inspiring, and the aura of a monarch was naturally imposing. Unfortunately, his hand, which was holding the halberd, was trembling slightly. This trembling proved how bad his current situation was. Ocean Emperor. When Shui Yang arrived in front of Xiao Yin, the latter's expression was a mixture of worry and anger. Why did you come out? What about those silver needles? I am the Ocean Emperor. The Ocean Sovereign's dull voice came out of the suit of armor. Even though it took a lot of effort for him to utter those words, his tone was firm and unwavering. You are the Ocean Emperor, and because you are... This monarch is also a father. Xiao Yan's meaning was clear. What he wanted to say was, just because it was the Ocean Empress, he needed to take a good rest. Not only did he need to recover his vitality and divine soul, but he also had to stabilize his symptoms. The Divine Mountain Monarchs were the pillars of the new era, and they were indispensable to the Divine Mountain. If it was for the future of the era, he shouldn't have shown himself at this time. The current era had not yet reached a critical juncture of life and death. However, the Ocean Emperor's father rendered Xiao Yin speechless. Bei is waiting for this monarch to bring her older sisters back. This monarch has let Xianling down. At the very least, this monarch wants to bear the responsibility of a father and an irresponsible husband before I die. The god race is also this sovereign's root. This sovereign will not shirk his responsibility to defend against foreign enemies. With that, the Ocean Emperor coughed violently. Xiaoyan clearly saw a trace of reddish gold ooze out from the cracks in her armor. Ocean Emperor, if not for those silver needles, you would have died. The Ocean Emperor laughed, but his laughter was mixed with so many emotions that it was hard to tell just how complex his emotions were. Even if I die, I'm still one of the 8 great emperors. I am still the Ocean Emperor, Shuiyang. At that moment, the Ocean Emperor strode forward, his sea god crown dazzling. He pointed his halberd at the outsider invaders. His proud, aloof figure faced off against billions of invaders. Xiaoyan stood behind him, only one phrase lingering in his mind. One man holds the pass against 10,000 enemies. Come forth and accept your death. Rumble. A turbulent aura emanated from the Ocean Emperor's body, and a violent gust of wind blew back everyone within 100 meters of him, be they era experts or outsiders. Only he and his halberd remained. Yale. As he looked up at the outsider invaders, Yi Zichen felt the blood in his chest churn. He'd made a mistake. Betting on Yale was the worst decision Yi Zichen had ever made. Big Sister Luer, let's go. The Aho Go Yuzhan raised his silver staff and charged towards the invaders. The other auxiliary stars followed suit, as did the Yao experts. Divine-powered cannon fire. Zwa-Mo immediately activated the divine-powered cannon, while Xia Kiki transformed into a golden dragon and slaughtered the invaders. Star Lord Yi. Screw off. Elves are the 5 elements. Since negotiations had broken down, Yi Zichen didn't want to waste any more time with Yale. He could only fight. He had to resolve everything as quickly as possible. Yang Jian and the others were still waiting for him in the universe secret realm. The 5 elements' elemental spirits emerged from their bodies. The elemental spirits took their respective positions, and surging elemental essence gathered around them. Starlight. Boom! Heaven and earth trembled. Day and night suddenly swapped places in the clear sky, and a dazzling river of stars filled the sky. Boss, he's mobilizing the power of the stars. Go Yuzhan chuckled as a star brand appeared between his eyebrows. Let's not waste any more time. Buzz. Ripples spread outward like waves, and a beam of purple light pierced the clouds and landed directly between Yi Zichen's eyebrows. Apart from that, the 4 auxiliary stars by the Emperor's star side flickered with light as well, and azure starlight descended from above. Before long, more and more stars appeared, and starlight began to fall from the heads of the Yao experts as well. The river stars. Yale watched this scene with interest, but his expression was one of disdain. Borrowing the power of the stars to raise your cultivation is still an external source of power. It's enough to beat you up. At that moment, Yi Zichen suddenly appeared behind Yale. Yale, who'd been laughing at Yi Zichen's ability to borrow the power of the stars, suddenly widened his eyes. Before he could react, he suffered a heavy blow to the back of his neck. Bang! Yale plummeted down from the sky, but as he was falling, Yi Zichen teleported behind him once again. Bang! Yi Zichen kicked him in the back, sent him flying again, then teleported again. After dozens of blows, Yale couldn't fight back in the slightest. Goodbye. Bang! Yi Zichen kicked him viciously again. This time, Yale's chest caved in, and he coughed up a mouthful of blood. The impact of this kick made it impossible for him to maintain his balance. All he could do was let himself fall from the sky until he smashed a massive crater in the ground. At the same time, the 5 elements' elemental spirits finished charging up. Countless elemental mysteries shot toward him like cannonballs. Chapter 1931. The Emperor Star's radiant body went all out. From Yale's one-sided abuse, he couldn't have guessed that the Emperor Star's radiant body would increase Yi Zichen's strength by so much. He was practically powerless to resist. The 5 elements' profound mysteries continued to wreak havoc in the bottomless chasm. The raging energies of the 5 elements complemented and countered each other, raising everything within 100 miles to the ground. The once lush vegetation had long since vanished. Gulp! Go Yuzhan's Ahogue swayed back and forth as he gripped his metal staff. He gulped despite himself. Fatty, is boss really that fierce? Regardless of whether it was Yi Zichen or Yale, both of them were extremely important figures in this battle. Their clash was bound to draw the attention of most people. However, when they saw Yi Zichen's lightning-fast attacks, which left Yale no room to breathe and even threatened to obliterate him, this kind of strength was hard to believe. Even Sulu Er's icy aura stagnated. She stared at the chasm for a long time, dazed. The corners of Emperor Hades, Su Yun's lips curled upwards. He looked at Yi Zichen's back, at his good brother's current state. He couldn't help but feel satisfied. Xia Kiki covered her mouth. Su Yin stared intently, and Zuo was in a daze. Everyone looked at the chasm, at Yi Zichen's majestic back, clad in his blue imperial robes. Their hearts were filled with astonishment. Yale's fate was unknown. The invaders' morale had plummeted. The Yao experts, on the other hand, were in high spirits. They brandished their weapons and charged head-on. Whoosh! The fire elemental spirit whistled, then placed a tender hand on his forehead and gazed off into the distance. He's going to be blasted to smithereens this time, more or less. The lightning elemental spirit, who'd always been relatively calm, nodded. He wasn't as lively as the fire elemental spirit, but his eyes shone with arrogance. He wouldn't comment on the other elemental spirits' profound mysteries, but he had absolute confidence in his elemental mysteries. Before attacking, the 5 element spirits were already in a state of charging up power. Among them, the lightning elemental spirit had been accumulating power the longest. It was all for the sake of unleashing his own ultimate profound mysteries. Apocalyptic gray thunder. Since its birth, it had only released it once, and that time, it had turned several planes into dust. This time, the profound meaning energy was completely condensed into a thunderbolt. He couldn't imagine who would be able to withstand this kind of energy, not to mention that it was supported by the lightning elemental fairy. It's best if we can solve it. As expected, the water elemental sprite was lying in the void, lazily closing its eyes to rest. I don't like fighting and killing. It's so tiring. Me too. At this moment, the wind elemental sprite that had been hiding behind the fire elemental sprite also nodded. Hey, we can do it, right? As the other elemental fairies conversed, the fire elemental fairy approached Yi Zichen and smiled, as if she were asking for praise. After finishing off Yale, Yi Zichen didn't say anything. The fire elemental spirit didn't believe that Yi Zichen wouldn't be excited after finishing off the final boss of a foreign race. His silence might be because he was frightened by the power of the elemental spirits. Now you know how powerful we are. Previously, you said that you didn't want us to follow you. Now, do you realize that you made a wrong decision? Still nothing. Yi Zichen froze in midair, as if he had been immobilized. Hey, can't you say something before? The fire elemental spirit fumed. What it didn't know was that the reason Yi Zichen was silent was because he felt something strange. His soul, it seemed to be missing. He hadn't noticed it before, but after absorbing the starlight into his body and putting on the Emperor's star robe, the feeling of his soul being missing grew even stronger. Right now, he wasn't completely complete. Somewhere in this world, there was still a fragment of his soul, but he couldn't understand it. The only place where his soul was missing was in the lower realms. He had no choice but to seal the 4 zombie progenitors. After his cultivation increased, he retrieved his soul. There was nothing missing. Why did he have this feeling now? Where did I lose it? Yi Zichen couldn't help but question himself. That was why he didn't answer the fire elemental spirit's question. As for Yale's death, that's even more ridiculous. No matter what, Yale killed his master to become the emperor. If he was killed just like that, then he didn't have the right to sit on the throne. Yi Zichen already felt that the sensation from Yale's body was rather strange. Even though his attacks were very fierce and didn't stop with Yale's cultivation, he wouldn't be on the defensive the entire time. He could resist, but I can't kill him. Yi Zichen believed that his near-flawless cooperation with the 5 elemental spirits would at least be able to injure him quite a bit. You bastard. The fire elemental spirit decided to ignore Yi Zichen after not receiving any praise. It looked around a few times then found the most beautiful spot in the area. Su Yan, Xia Kiki. Just as he was about to walk towards Su Yan, I have a bad feeling, the lightning elemental spirit said with a serious look. What bad feeling? All the elemental spirits looked over. Even the fire elemental spirit stopped. Don't bullshit. Don't spout nonsense. Who can block our combined 5 elements profundities? He'll be lucky if he doesn't turn to dust. Bad feeling? What? Is your wife going to give birth? The fire elemental spirit said half-jokingly, showing his confidence in them. Surprisingly, the lightning elemental spirit also nodded. Nothing will go wrong. He won't be able to live. OL5, why do you have a bad feeling? Asked the wind elemental spirit. Just now, the lightning elemental spirit gulped, then pointed at the crater where Yale was blasted. I sensed the aura of the previous demon emperor from him. What? Hearing that, the elemental spirits focused their eyes, while the water elemental spirit, who had been lying lazily, flipped over in shock. Really, I definitely didn't sense wrongly. I was by his side when he was condensing his godhead. That person has the aura of the demon emperor's godhead. The lightning elemental spirit swore solemnly. At that moment, a black shadow suddenly appeared behind him and placed a hand on his shoulder. As expected of a lightning elemental spirit, you're very sensitive to your old master's aura. Chapter 1932. The smiles that had just lingered on the faces of the era's experts froze the moment Yale appeared. He didn't die. Under such a powerful attack, no one could imagine who would be able to withstand it. But Yale's situation, he wasn't injured at all, and his robes weren't damaged in the slightest. The 4 auxiliary stars furrowed their brows. Just now, their cooperation with the 5 elemental fairies had been practically flawless. They had a clear understanding of Yale's strength. Even if they couldn't obliterate him, they should have at least injured him. But now he was completely unscathed. That shouldn't be the case. Even someone as calm as Inshang was baffled. He'd been paying close attention to Yale's clash with the Emperor's stars. While Yale was passively taking their blows, he hadn't sensed any energy fluctuations from Yale. Yi Zichen was standing here unscathed. Only, it seems Yi Zichen was fighting a stand-in from the start. Emperor Hades, Su Yun's gaze was solemn. That was the only explanation he had. Your Majesty, the low morale of the extraterrestrial invaders instantly soared. To them, Yo was a soul-like figure. His unscathed appearance was a huge boost to their morale. Deafening roars reverberated through the sky. For a moment, the outsiders who'd been forced into retreat by the Yao seemed to receive a baptism of power. They fought fiercely against the first-era experts like primordial beasts. The outsiders' morale soared, and the Yao experts gradually began to feel the strain. They constantly shrank their formation. Su Yin was the one who was most affected by the Yao race's retreat. As the goddess of life, she could clearly sense that the Yao's demand for her divine arts had skyrocketed. Using them over the channel took a heavy toll on her godhead's power and mental strength. Back then, it was your betrayal that led to the destruction of the Second Era, wasn't it? Yale laughed and reached out to the Lightning Fairy. I admire your decisiveness. How about it? Why don't you join me and continue serving me? Yale's unscathed appearance came as a huge shock to the 5 elemental fairies. They found it hard to believe that their combined elemental mysteries hadn't harmed Yale in the slightest. Not only that, but his robes weren't damaged in the slightest. How could this be? The wind elemental fairy covered her small mouth in shock and confusion. She mumbled something to herself that the people around her could not hear clearly as she took a few steps back. A rare water elemental sprite was no longer lying down lazily. His body was surrounded by a large amount of water elements, and a substantial water screen condensed around him. He did not speak, or perhaps he was too lazy to speak. Impossible. Impossible. It could be said that Yale's safety was the greatest blow to the lightning elemental sprite. He was too arrogant. Even though he usually behaved calmly and seemed like a humble elemental elf, there was no way to erase the pride in his bones. He prided himself on being the strongest of the 5 elements. His lightning-type profound meaning was the one with the highest offensive power amongst the 5 elemental profound meanings. When his power Upanishad fell on Yale's body, he was so confident that Yale couldn't survive. However, Yale, who was standing there, gave him a head-on blow. He could not accept it, nor did he want to accept it. Impossible! Even now, Yale was standing in front of them. He was still mumbling to himself, as if he had gone crazy and could not believe what was happening in front of him. Fourth brother, don't just stand there. Say fifth brother. The fire elemental sprite roared angrily. However, the fire elemental sprite seemed to have entered a nightmare, immersed in his own world, completely ignoring the fire elemental sprite's roars, nor worrying about the lightning elemental sprite situation. Even if he was the lightning elemental sprite was the closest to the 5 elements. None of them can be relied on. Bang! The flames burned fiercely, and a pair of flaming hands descended from a void. The scorching heat of the flames seemed to melt the surrounding heaven and earth into liquid, revealing a terrifying black hole in space. Get your filthy hands off me, you bastard! The fire elements in the world became active under the control of that pair of flaming hands. The scorching flames, accompanied by surging heat waves, slapped towards the God Emperor of Destruction, Yale, who was behind the lightning elemental sprite. This scorching heat made the world of this era unable to withstand it. However, Yale only smiled lightly, his palms still reaching forward and landing on the shoulder of the lightning elemental sprite. Come with me. Get lost. The flaming hands descended with a loud bang. At the same time, the robe on Yale's back also rose into the air nimbly, blocking the hands. Then it directly swallowed them. Not long after, the fire elements that had been swallowed by the robe were violently spat out by the robe. Ha! The fire elemental sprite was disdainful. He was the spirit of all flames, the leader of all the flames in the world. No matter how many flames there were, to him, wow, what a beautiful lady! Suddenly, the fire elemental sprite's expression changed drastically. As if he was possessed, he opened his arms against the oncoming flames without any defense. He was indeed the spirit of all flames. However, even if he was the spirit of all flames, he would still be heavily injured when facing those fire elements. Clear spring flow. Whoosh! A stream appeared in front of the fire elemental sprite. When the fire elements collided with the stream, scorching steam filled the air and enveloped the entire void. Everyone was trapped in the mist, and the water elemental sprite took this opportunity to search for the fire elemental sprite. He wasn't there. The fire elemental sprite's previous position was now nowhere to be seen. Lady, do you like to eat fruits or vegetables? The familiar tone and voice made the water elemental sprite turn to look. Beside Yale, the fire elemental sprite laughed foolishly at the void. As for the lady he spoke of, the water elemental sprite could not see her at all. He looked at the wind, thunder, and lightning. These people were either full of fear, mumbling to themselves in a daze, or immersed in something terrifying. Their expressions showed that they were struggling. Not long after, not far from him, the water elemental sprite saw a large bed that looked like it would be very comfortable to lie on. The moment he saw it, the desire in the water elemental's heart made him take a few steps towards it. Let's stop here. The water arrow shot out, and the bed disappeared. The water elemental sprite looked at Yale with bright eyes, then at his brothers. You've done your homework. Ha! Interesting. Yale laughed heartily. He was not at all surprised that the water elemental sprite could break free from this perfect dreamland that he had personally created for them. Laziness is indeed not a fatal weakness. Actually, you're the most perfect of the 5 elements. Chapter 1933. Of the 5 elemental spirits, water was the only one who'd remained clear-headed. Although he didn't know what kind of illusion the other brothers were in, he could guess a little bit. Yale had grasped their weaknesses, which was why he was so fearless. The electric elemental blamed himself, the thunder elemental was vexed, the fire elemental was in despair, and the wind elemental was terrified. The five elements' advantage lay in their complementarity. Heaven and earth used the five elements as its foundation. If they combined, they wouldn't fear any provocation. But if they separated, then their strength would be greatly reduced. It was just as Yale had said. Even if the water elemental spirit was clear-headed, it could still control the profound truths of the water element. If the other four elemental spirits were blinded by the illusion, no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't do anything alone. The water elemental had been lazy all day. Even turning around seemed like torture to him, but now his mind was racing. He was the only one who'd remained clear-headed. He had to think of a way to awaken the other elemental spirits, and, judging from the current situation, Emperor Star. As countless thoughts flashed through his mind, he thought of the final condition, which was also the only feasible method, which was the Emperor Star-Lord. Before he could move, a warm hand patted his shoulder. He looked up and saw that it was none other than the Emperor Star, Yi Zichen. During this time, Yi Zichen had been so preoccupied with thinking about where that incomplete soul was that he hadn't noticed the elemental spirits were trapped in the illusion. Given his current temperament, he shouldn't have been like this. This sort of deep contemplation was simply impossible in a situation like this. If Yale had attacked him at that time, it was very likely that he would have been caught off guard. His sense of crisis wouldn't have allowed him to do so. There was only one possibility. He had also fallen for Yale's Tao and entered the illusion that Yale had set up. Just when did it start? Yi Zichen looked up at Yale's smiling face and furrowed his brows. She was certain that Yale hadn't set up his illusion while they were fighting. In that case, it had to have happened before or after. However, before he'd even used the profound truths of the five elements, Yi Zichen had sensed the imperfections in his soul. At the time, he'd been deep in thought and hadn't paid much attention to Yale's attack. From the looks of it, Yale had clearly already. Could it be? Suddenly, Yi Zichen looked up into the sky. There were no extraterrestrial invaders above the demon race's void. The dense mass of extraterrestrial invaders they had seen previously was nowhere to be seen. Not only was there cannon fire, but there was also the battle between the demon clan's mighty figures. Not only that, but the four auxiliary stars were also deeply involved. God Emperor of Destruction, nice move. Yi Zichen cupped his hands. What a dream, to be able to cause so many experts to fall at the same time. What kind of astonishing divine power was required to create such a dreamlike illusory technique? At this moment, the many experts of the demon clan were completely immersed in it. They could not distinguish between dream and reality. They couldn't be blamed. It could only be said that Yale's methods were too brilliant. He had made the dream seem too real, so real that the emotions and expressions of the extraterrestrial invaders in the dream were just right. When Yale looked like he was being one-sidedly abused, the fear they revealed, and their morale soared afterwards. All of this was no different from reality. This method, Star-Lord Yi, are you trying to hide this, Emperor? Yale chuckled. No, I'm truly impressed. Yi Zichen said to Yale from the bottom of his heart. Judging from the current situation, Yale had the absolute advantage in the game between the two of them. He'd relied on his own strength to toy with the five elemental fairies, the four auxiliary stars, and the entire Yao alliance, including Yi Zichen himself. In the dream, the right time, the right place, the right people. Yi Zichen had all of them, yet he'd still lost. He'd lost in absolute strength. He looked down. He looked at his starlight imperial robes. Even if he could still exchange blows with Yale, he might not be at a disadvantage in the short term. But he couldn't save the people in the dream. Yale, who controlled the direction of the dream, could easily adjust the emotions of the people in the dream and even decide their life and death. This went against Yi Zichen's original intentions. The purpose of his Emperor Star's existence was to let people live, not to live alone. No, emotions. Suddenly, Yi Zichen's heart trembled. When he saw the fury on the Yao experts' faces, even the four auxiliary stars. Emotions. Yale could manipulate their emotions. Even so, if it were just a dream, it would have been extremely difficult to maintain control over such a large area and make it difficult for so many people to escape. Only emotions could be manipulated. by manipulating their emotions and combining them with the dream. You, what's wrong with me? Yale chuckled, then looked up at the sky and shrugged. Star-Lord Yi, there's no need to panic. I won't take their lives, nor will I fight to the death with you. In truth, I'm only here for two things. Once I've dealt with them, I'll be returning to the God realm. Two things? Yi Zichen furrowed his brows. You can't really say it's two things. In truth, I'm here for two people. Fortunately, this empress has already found the second person. With that, a pair of giant hands appeared in the sky. Before long, Yao Emperor Qing Lan appeared in the Yao ceiling pagoda. Uncle Lan, cried Yi Zichen, but before he could, after grabbing Qing Lan, Yale's hand grabbed Su Yin as well. Su Yin, I've waited far too long for the two of them. If Qing Lan still hadn't appeared, I really would have lost my patience. Yale looked down at the two people in his hands and smiled in satisfaction. He didn't hesitate at all. He stomped into the sky in an attempt to snatch them back. Yale simply snapped his fingers. Ugh! Yi Zichen inexplicably coughed up a mouthful of blood. At the same time, he clutched his head. Large beads of sweat rolled down his face, making him look pale and hideous. I almost forgot. There's something I didn't tell you. Yale suddenly stopped, then looked at Yi Zichen, who was crouched on the ground, unable to move. That's right, your dream. That incomplete soul really does exist. The Emperor Starlight requires a complete soul to activate. You're in too much of a hurry. The Emperor Starlight is already starting to devour you. Good luck. Yale chuckled, then tapped the sky. Chapter 1934. Green smoke filled the sky. As Yale's voice faded, a black hole that seemed to be able to devour the heavens and earth appeared beneath his feet. It slowly devoured his body before it disappeared. He was gone, and the dream was shattered. The enemy in front of everyone shattered like a bubble. When they walked out of the dream one after another and saw that there was nothing in the world, they were shocked and at a loss. Big Sister, the fire elemental sprite, who had been chasing the air for a long time, stopped in panic. He stared blankly in front of him, then looked around, involuntarily feeling a lingering fear in his heart. What was he doing just now? Wasn't he supposed to be saving Old Five? Why was he chasing after the pretty sister? Then Old Five, you're awake. The water elemental sprite appeared behind the fire elemental sprite. The two completely different elemental powers collided as they approached each other. After experiencing all this, the water elemental sprite was no longer as lazy as before. He let out a deep sigh and looked at the fire elemental sprite with a helpless gaze. A leopard never changes its spots. No matter how much the fire elemental sprite swore, Yale still found its weakness. Fortunately, Yale did not use it to attack the others. Just now, the fire elemental sprite wanted to say something, but stopped. It was the same for the water elemental sprite. He moved his lips a few times, but in the end, he only patted him lightly on the shoulder. The wind and thunder elemental sprites also rushed over. From the expression of the thunder elemental sprite, it was obvious that he was in a terrible mood. When the dream shattered and he woke up from it, he knew what had happened to him just now. The thunder element was the most tyrannical of the 5 elements. But as an elemental sprite, he had been trapped by the faintest of illusions and had even sunk deep into them. He could not forgive such a mistake. The wind elemental sprite bit his lip lightly, not daring to speak. He was timid, but very smart. After walking out of the dream, he knew what had happened just now. It seemed that her timidity and cowardice had been used by others. She, who had not done her duty, was too embarrassed to say anything in such a situation. The fire, wind, and thunder elemental sprites looked at each other. From each other's eyes, they could all see the self-blame. Confirmed looks were people whose weaknesses had been taken advantage of. If you want to blame yourself, I think you should put it aside for a while. At this moment, the water elemental sprite glanced at them and said, I suggest that we discuss how to save fifth brother. Old Five. The lightning elemental sprite's eyes widened, and it looked around. There was really no trace of the lightning elemental sprite. He, he was taken away. The water elemental sprite lowered her gaze. It wasn't just him. Did you see the Emperor's star? The elemental fairies looked in the direction of the water elemental's head and saw Yi Zichen squatting on the ground, clutching his head with both hands as he rolled around in the air in pain. What happened to him? Who knows? The water elemental's answer might seem a little cold and inhumane to outsiders. No matter what, they were serving the Emperor's star. Despite Yi Zichen's pain, the elemental fairies didn't seem to care at all. They simply looked on as if they had nothing to do with it. Little did they know, this was an elemental spirit. They couldn't possibly be like the great sage Yang Jian, who valued Yi Zichen's safety as much as their own lives. Yang Jian and the others were close friends with the great sage, but the elemental fairies weren't. It wasn't that they were indifferent. Rather, they'd lived for far too long and seen far too much. They'd experienced the deaths of countless Emperor stars. To them, Yi Zichen was nothing more than a host. If he died, at most, they'd return to the mausoleum and wait for the next host to appear. Yi Zichen's life or death had almost no effect on them. He's pretty miserable, too, sighed the water elemental fairy. That god of life should be his sweetheart, but she was captured by Yale as well. Just as he was about to step forward, something like this happened. Yale said his soul was incomplete, and the Emperor Star's power was counterproductive. Incomplete. Yes, incomplete. That's right, incomplete. That's not important, said the lightning elemental fairy. If his sweetheart really was captured, that means he'll definitely go to Yale's place. Then that's exactly what I was thinking. The water elemental fairy nodded. That's right, but that's assuming he can return to normal. In his current state, we might as well go alone. F***CK, where's he? If you got the guts, don't run. Fight me another 300 rounds. Up in the sky, a Hogue was furious. In his dream, he'd encountered a troublesome opponent. No matter how he attacked, his opponent easily blocked his attacks. Go Yuzhan refused to accept this. His attacks grew even fiercer. His opponent began to retreat. Just as he was about to win, his opponent actually ran away. Go Yuzhan, still steeped in rage, swept his staff horizontally, causing the surrounding space to ripple. If you got the guts, don't run. Stop yelling. Are you embarrassed? Suddenly, Yin Shang appeared beside him and whispered, "We were all tricked. Just now. Everything we encountered was an illusion." Huh? What did you say? Go Yuzhan was stunned. Illusion, illusion, illusion. Yin Shang grabbed Go Yuzhan's ear and shouted several times. This time, Go Yuzhan completely calmed down. He covered his ear and glared at Yin Shang. If it's an illusion, then it's an illusion. Why are you shouting so loudly? Aren't you deaf? As the two of them bickered, Empress Su Lu Er's gaze deepened, and she occasionally stroked the air. She didn't say anything, but it was better than 1,000 words. Who would have thought? Who would have guessed it was all a dream? The other Yao experts were more or less in the same state. They were shocked by how real the dream was and lamented why they hadn't sensed it before. Those capable of fighting the outsiders were the cream of the crop. Every single one of them was a veteran of 100 battles. None of them could have guessed they'd fall for a simple illusion. They sighed, but they also rejoiced. If it hadn't been an illusion, how long could they have held out against so many invaders? Wouldn't they have become a burden to the Emperor's Star? The Emperor's Star. When they considered this, quite a few of them searched for the Emperor's Star's position. Just now, the Emperor's Star was fighting Yale. Since the illusion had been broken, didn't that mean? Easy. An earth-shattering roar exploded through the sky. The first person to appear by Yi Zichen's side was Emperor Hades, Su Yun. The others rushed towards the Emperor's Star as well. Su Yun hugged Yi Zichen tightly. When he saw his condition, his eyes reddened and he called out to the others. Notify the Hermit Emperor. Hurry up and notify the Hermit Emperor. It's been a long time since the Hermit Emperor. Chapter 1935. Starlight never retreated. Several hours had passed since Yale's departure. The fated stars, auxiliary stars, and myriad stars' power had all faded. Only the Emperor's Star's radiance remained, lingering in Yi Zichen's body. The spiritual energy that had once been suppressed by the elemental spirit's arms reappeared once more. The energies that had only just begun to fuse split once more, vying for supremacy. They tore at each other with all their might. How is easy? As soon as the doctor left his bed, the people waiting anxiously by the door crowded around him. The fated stars, Mo, and Xiaokiki were all present. The person treating Yi Zichen wasn't the Hermit Emperor, but he was the second in command of the Hermit Palace. His medical skills were unparalleled, and he was on par with even the Hermit Emperor. The Yao expert had rushed to the Divine Mountains as soon as possible. When he learned that the Emperor's star was in danger, he rushed to the Yao realm without a moment's rest. This was despite the fact that he'd been working day and night for several days straight. In the face of everyone's expectant gazes, the doctor sighed silently and furrowed his brows. He looked as if he wanted to say something, but hesitated. Then, he turned to the 5 elemental spirits. The others followed his gaze, only to see the fire elemental spirit shrug in pity. "I'm sorry." Emperor Hades's eyes instantly reddened, and his hands trembled uncontrollably. It was obvious he was doing his best to stabilize his emotions. After a while, he said in a low voice, "What do you mean? What do you mean by sorry?" "Emperor Hades, please calm down." Just as the doctor was about to reach out and comfort him, Emperor Hades swatted him away. "Calm down? You're telling me to calm down?" Emperor Hades glared at the doctor, his face bloodshot. His eyes blazed with fury, and his gaze was so ferocious he looked like he wanted to devour him whole. "Yi Zi is my best brother. Now that he's like this, you're telling me to calm down? How can I calm down? Tell me, tell me." Thud, thud, thud. Emperor Hades's furious roar forced the doctor back several steps. The entire room was filled with a violent energy. Quite a few objects in the room were smashed to smithereens. At that moment, Yinshang's eyes narrowed. His right hand formed a spirit-focused incantation, and he slapped Emperor Hades on the shoulder. "Calm down. The Emperor is still in bed." As soon as he finished speaking, Yinshang cupped his hands towards the doctor and the 5 elemental spirits, and smiled apologetically. "Emperor Hades, please forgive me for my concern." "It's fine." The doctor waved his hand, and the 5 elemental spirits didn't take what had just happened seriously. "It's just that we really want to know what's going on with the Emperor. You are all aware of his identity and status. This era needs him. It can be said that he is the only one who can fight against Yale right now," Yinshang said solemnly. "But you said that you were powerless, and asked us to calm down. We really don't have a choice." The water elemental sprite took a few steps forward, then turned around to look at Yi Zichen, whose face was still contorted in pain. The energy in his body is too mottled, and there was an energy riot before. Back then, our 5 elements were still in their complete form, which was why we were able to suppress and fuse them. But now, can't you just say it directly? Said the fire elemental sprite. Our lightning elemental sprite has been abducted, which means we're missing 1 element. At your level, you should understand what missing 1 element means. We really want the Emperor's star to wake up too. The timid wind elemental sprite stood behind a fire elemental sprite and bit her lip. Yil took 5th brother away. If we want to save him, we need the Emperor's star's power. We want him to wake up too, but we really can't do it. The energy is too violent. The 4 of us alone can't suppress it. The elemental sprites explained the reason. Yinshang's brows hadn't relaxed since Yi Zichen's injuries. When he heard the elemental sprite's explanation, his frown deepened. Yinshang was familiar with energy turbulence. It wasn't just him. Everyone else in the room had some understanding of it as well. When one was conscious, there was a chance that their body might explode if they didn't control the turbulence properly. Furthermore, Yi Zichen wasn't conscious at all, and the situation had taken a turn for the worse. "That's exactly what I wanted to say." At this moment, the doctor that was invited spoke up. "The energy within the Emperor Star's body is mottled. Many different types of energy are trying to dominate it, so they're constantly clashing against each other. If this sort of collision affects the Emperor Star's meridians, that's fine. Even if his veins break, I can rely on my medical skills and the medicines of the Upheaval Alliance's R&D department to heal him. But what? Asked Emperor Hades anxiously. They're tearing apart the Emperor Star's soul. After a moment's hesitation, the doctor gnashed his teeth and explained the situation. Boom! It was like a bolt from the blue. When Xia Kiki and Zhua Mo heard this, their heads buzzed. Then, it felt like the sky had collapsed. The soul. Humans were fundamentally spiritual. If they didn't have a soul, then living was no different from being dead. The energy within his body was actually tearing apart his soul. That's right. That's exactly it. The doctor nodded solemnly, his expression somewhat strange. In truth, the Emperor Star situation is quite strange. Although the energy within his body is violent, the most violent is actually the power of the stars. The other energies are just passive counterattacks. Could it be that Yale was telling the truth? Murmured the Wind Fairy. What? Roared Emperor Hades. The Wind Fairy had always been cowardly. When Emperor Hades shouted at it, it shrank back in fright. The Fire Fairy took some time to calm it down, then focused its gaze. Before Yale left, he said that the Emperor Star's soul was incomplete. His soul wasn't complete, which is why the Emperor Star's astral energy is attacking him. Right, shouted the doctor, nodding vigorously. It seems the Emperor Star's soul isn't strong enough to fully guide it, so a portion of its astral energy is in a state of disarray. That's why it's attacking the Emperor Star. Incomplete? Didn't we find the soul that sealed the beast a long time ago? How could it still be incomplete? Said Zhua Mo that. I don't know, said the doctor, smiling bitterly. Or maybe I'm wrong. The soul. My knowledge of the soul is still too shallow. Perhaps. You're not wrong. Suddenly, the door to the room swung open. Chapter 1936. The Hermit Emperor. When they saw the white-haired old man with a benevolent smile, Emperor Hades and the others froze. Then, their faces lit up with delight. Ever since Zhou Wu broke the foundation of the new era, no one knew where the Hermit Emperor had gone. Some people wondered if the Hermit Emperor had met with misfortune. The situation had been dire. Although the emperors had all come out unscathed, that didn't mean they'd escaped unscathed. Back then, Zhou Wu had transcended. There were even 2 god kings from the Outer Realm god race. After several months without news of the Hermit Emperor's whereabouts, some people had long since decided he was in trouble. In truth, at their level, cultivating in seclusion for 100 years was but a snap of the fingers. Disappearing for a few months was nothing. It was just that the current situation was special. When that kind of situation appeared, that kind of thought would appear in people's minds. However, given the Hermit Emperor's lofty reputation and status, no one dared openly discuss the matter. Now that the Hermit Emperor had returned, they were naturally overjoyed. Who knew? The Hermit Emperor might have a way to save Yi Zichen. Furthermore, from what he just said, Senior Hermit Emperor is Yi Zichen. The Emperor's Star is the foundation of an era. His life or death determines the future of the era. Setting aside my personal relationship with little friend Yi, how could I possibly ignore little friend Yi when it comes to the fate of this era? The Hermit Emperor stroked his beard and chuckled. His smile also made Emperor Hades. His smile warmed Emperor Hades' heart. That's easy for you to say. The corners of the 5 elemental fairies' lips twitched. No one understood Yi Zichen's current situation better than they did. The energy inside his body was in a frenzy. There were only 2 ways to save Yi Zichen. The first was to guide the energy so it could coexist in harmony. The second was to suppress it. The 5 elemental fairies had already tried suppressing him. Even if they were missing one element, they were still the primary elements of heaven and earth. They were still respected. If even they couldn't suppress him, they couldn't imagine who could. Waking him up isn't something you can do just by talking. Do you understand his situation? Do you know how serious the energy inside is? Do you know who you're talking to? The second in command of the Hermit Palace roared. In his eyes, the Hermit Emperor was practically a god. To outsiders, everyone thought that his medical skills were on par with the Hermit Emperor's. Little did he know that only he and the Hermit Emperor knew that the Hermit Emperor had imparted his medical skills to him. His medical attainments were only scratching the surface of the Hermit Emperor's. The Hermit Emperor merely chuckled in response to the lightning elemental's disrespect. After so many years, you're still so arrogant. Looks like time hasn't worn away your edges and corners. Not bad. The Hermit Emperor's gentle tone stunned everyone. The Hermit Emperor was indeed an amiable old man to outsiders. He was tolerant and magnanimous, treating everyone with a smile. However, a monarch was still a monarch. No matter how close she appeared to the people, his prestige as a monarch was still there. Just now, when the Hermit Emperor faced the lightning elemental sprite, his smile was so ordinary that it was enough to cause others to lose focus. The five elements elemental fairies were stunned as well, especially the thunder elemental fairy. After a brief moment of absent-mindedness, she stared at the Hermit Emperor's aged face, as if she wanted to see through his very soul. I know about little friend Ye's situation. By now, the Hermit Emperor had already reached Yi Zichen's bedside. The two men and one woman beside him also walked over. Not only that, but one of the men also had a bitter smile on his face. Little friend Ye's energy is berserk because his soul isn't whole. After using the Emperor Star's radiance, the Emperor Star subconsciously assumed him to be its master. However, after possessing him, it sensed that his soul was different from the true Emperor Star, which is why he suffered a backlash. As soon as he finished speaking, the Hermit Emperor looked at the man beside him, who seemed to be feeling a little helpless. It's time. The man nodded, and everyone turned to look at the man. Was he the Emperor Star's remnant soul? Everyone looked at the man suspiciously. Based on the man's aura, he was at least an imperial emperor. He was wearing a leather coat, the most primitive animal skin that had not been processed. There was a curved bow on his shoulder, but there were no arrows on his body. As soon as the Hermit Emperor finished speaking, the man removed his bow. As he removed it, he caressed it fondly, his gaze as gentle as water. Hoi! The woman gripped the man's hand tightly, her eyes filled with longing and reluctance. It's no big deal. He's me, and I'm him. Back then, I didn't want to return, so I forcibly left behind a remnant soul. Now, it's time to return it to myself. As she spoke, tears welled up in the woman's eyes. The man also gently wiped away the tears at the corner of her eyes. I'm still here, but in this life, I've appeared before you. Don't be sad. We share the same roots. Suddenly, the man grinned. I'm leaving. Live well. Oh, buzz. Suddenly, white light erupted from the man's back. It was so blinding, they couldn't even open their eyes. Even with their divine senses, they could vaguely make out a door between Yi Zichen's brows. The man's body shimmered with white light, becoming increasingly illusory. Eventually, he became a transparent wisp of his soul. When he reached the door, he subconsciously glanced at the sobbing woman, then resolutely walked inside. His soul vanished. The light in the room instantly receded. Everyone stared at Yi Zichen. Only the woman sat paralyzed on the ground, tears streaming down her cheeks. He had left. When this wisp of soul merged with Yi Zichen, it proved that Yi Zichen's soul was no longer incomplete. Yi Zichen was the Emperor Star. They believed that once his soul was complete, the Emperor Star starlight would no longer trouble him. In truth, this was their original goal. From the moment they left the witch realm, this was the result they'd wanted. Along the way, he had given her far too many warnings. At the time, she really had said she'd accept him. She'd once secretly fallen in love with Yi Zichen, and she knew that Yi Zichen's past life was somewhat like Ho Yi's. But now that things had come to this, she couldn't bring herself to be happy. Because she was Chang, even though she knew he was Ho Yi's reincarnation, she hadn't chosen the wrong person. But after seeing Ho Yi with her own eyes, after spending so much time with him, it was as if she'd returned to her happiest days in the Moon Palace. No one could give her this kind of happiness, not even Yi Zichen. Even if he was Ho Yi's reincarnation, because he wasn't the real Ho Yi. Chapter 1937. Ho Yi. Hearing Chang Yi's heart-wrenching cries, Emperor Ming couldn't help but raise his brows. Was Ho-i the Almighty who shot down the sun? Who would have thought that he was actually a remnant of Ye's soul? But unfortunately, for the others, Ho-i's dedication made them respect him from the bottom of their hearts, even if he was once a remnant soul on Yi Zichen's path of reincarnation. He could rely on his remnant soul to reach the imperial monarch realm. This kind of perseverance was also amazing. After all, even if one possessed a complete soul, the right time, place, and people couldn't be lacking when attaining the imperial monarch realm. Not to mention that an incomplete soul had some innate flaws in comprehending the Tao of the heaven and earth. The emperor, no matter where he was, he could become an overlord, but he could give it up without any hesitation. Of course, no one knew if he had hesitated before. All Ming Di and the others saw was that he had given up without hesitation. This kind of realization made people sigh with pity. But that was all. Perhaps this wasn't particularly fair to him, but to Emperor Hades and the others, Yi Zichen was far more important than Ho-i. What they cared about was not Ho-i's sacrifice. It was Yi Zichen. Could he wake up? Can you wake up? Zuoyamo and Xia Kiki clenched their fists. Everything about Yi Zichen had an enormous impact on them. It could be said that he was their rope. In contrast, Emperor Ming was much more composed. At the end of the day, he was the underworld emperor of the Nether River. How could he, who was in a high position, be emotional like the two little girls? Even so, Emperor Hades muttered Yi Zichen's name in his heart. Their souls had already fused. When Ho-i's remnant soul entered Yi Zichen's forehead, a thin layer of white light surrounded him. As time passed, Yi Zichen's pain seemed to lessen considerably. Although he still hadn't woken up, his expression was no longer as pained as before. Ho-i Chang's pain didn't lessen. Anyone who understood the entanglement between Ho-i and Chang, he couldn't help but feel hurt. In the legends, Ho-i and Chang, they were both capable of becoming immortals. However, in her panic, Chang, he had swallowed the immortal ascension pill. From then on, the two of them were separated from each other. Now, they were finally reunited. But, Sister Chang, don't be too sad. Xiaokiki couldn't help but walk up and gently hug Chang. She actually didn't know what to say to comfort her. She just felt that it was too lonely to let Chang cry herself hoarse. Just then, Yi Zichen sat up on the bed. It was like a nightmare, and the dream made him sweat profusely. Almost everyone in the room crowded around her, including Chang Yiho he had left. To her, Yi Zichen was her only hope. Yezi, Imperial Star. The people in the room called out to Yi Zichen, who was lying on the bed. Yi Zichen looked around in confusion, until his gaze landed on Chang. At this moment, the tears in Chang Yi's eyes had yet to recede. This was the first time they had been reunited ever since they had parted at the vast glacial palace. He looked at the tears in Chang Yi's eyes in astonishment and didn't know what to say. He looked around and saw joy and relief in everyone's eyes. More importantly, why was Gu Zichen here too? What are you all doing here? Hermit Emperor, you're here too? This was the first time Yi Zichen had spoken since waking up. Earlier, some people asked if you were. It seems you truly are blessed with good fortune. The Hermit Emperor laughed uproariously. My old body no longer cares about life or death. Emperor Star, if you're talking about good fortune, you're the real deal. If you're talking about good fortune, then you're the real deal. Me? Yi Zichen clearly didn't quite understand the Hermit Emperor's words. His gaze focused, and the scene from his recent dream resurfaced in his mind. Just now, I had a dream. I dreamt that Yale came and trapped me and the entire Yao race in a dream. Then Yi Zichen's voice grew softer and softer as he saw the expressions of the others in the room. Is all of this real? Emperor Star, you know full well. Why lie to yourself? The Hermit Emperor chuckled. Not long ago, you suffered a backlash from Starlight. Fortunately, your remnant soul, Ho-i, was right next to you. I ran into him and brought him here. If not for that, I'm afraid you'd be in deep trouble. Ho-i, he was actually a remnant of his own soul. In other words, one of his reincarnations had been Ho-i. No wonder the three-legged golden crow in the Yao Ceiling Pagoda had been so unfriendly towards him. It must have sensed Ho Yi's aura on him, and he'd been the one who'd been shot down from the sky. He'd been thinking too far ahead. He hurriedly pulled his thoughts back to the present and glanced at Chang. Those tears were probably for Ho Yi, right? That wasn't all. If that hadn't been a dream, didn't that mean Yi Qinglan, Su Yin, and the others really had been captured by Yale? No, I have to go save them. Yi Zichen tried to climb out of bed, but Gu Zichen walked up to him and pressed down on his shoulders. Don't be in such a rush. There's something I need to tell you. Speak. Have you decided to go to the God Realm? Of course. Then you're just going to ignore the people of the secret realm, right? Yi Zichen felt like a bucket of cold water had been poured over his head. He instantly calmed down. That's right. And the great sage Yang Jian and the others. I'm going to the secret realm. Then what about the God Realm? Are you really going to let go of Qinglan, Su Yin, and the others? It's not just them. 5 of the 8 emperors of the Divine Mountains have been captured. Xiao Yumei, the Fox Empress, and the others are among them. Oh, right. Your mother is there too. What did you say? Yi Zichen grabbed Gu Zichen by the collar. His aura surged outward like a primordial beast. Your mother, the Lord of 7 Stars, Yi Rong, has been captured as well. Bang! Yi Zichen felt all his strength leave him. He collapsed onto the bed. You're all by yourself, but there are 2 places you need to go. How do you choose? Which side are you going to give up? I don't want to let go of either, but what are you going to do? Go in my place, said Yi Zichen solemnly. You're from a parallel plane. I trust you, but I can't. Gu Zichen cut him off without hesitation. I understand now. I don't belong here. I shouldn't have interfered with your life. My interference has caused too much of a butterfly effect. If this continues, I can't imagine what the future will be like. Then what should I do? Yi Zichen scratched his head. No matter how much he racked his brains, he never would have guessed. Chapter 1938. Yi Zichen's eyes lit up with excitement when he thought of helpers. He had always given himself too much pressure, thinking that these things should be handled by himself. But he forgot, this is the Milky Way. If the Milky Way galaxy was destroyed, nothing here would be spared. As such, Brother Yi, who did you think of? Gu Zichen smiled playfully, as if he'd already thought of a candidate. Western Buddhist region. That was the only thing Yi Zichen could think of. Western Buddhist region. From the start to the end, it gave off a mysterious and unfathomable feeling. The realm of the Buddha within was probably even more unfathomable. With their help, there was no need for them to head to the outer realms to fight against Yale. As long as they could go to the universe secret realm and save the great sage and the others, they would be able to do so. What's more, the great sage was the victorious fighting Buddha of the Buddhist domain. They probably wouldn't ignore him. As soon as he said that, Gu Zichen laughed. The Hermit Emperor laughed as well. What can I? Said Yi Zichen. You can try, but most likely you won't be able to contact him. Gu Zichen narrowed his eyes. Brother Yi, I have to say you know far too little about the Buddhist domain. Asking them to save the world. Not a bad idea, but it's very ignorant. What do you mean? How much do you understand about Buddha? Compassion, kind, and charitable? All are equal? When Gu Zichen finished speaking, everyone nodded in agreement. This wasn't just Yi Zichen's view of Buddhism. He was sure that anyone who knew of the Buddhist domain of the West felt the same way, especially Xia Kiki and the others in the modern realm. In their impression, Buddha was like this. The programs that could be seen in the temples outside and on TV were also preaching this. The Buddha is the coldest and most heartless. Unbeknownst to them, at this moment, Chang curled her lips and smiled coldly. Gu Zichen and the Hermit Emperor were still smiling, but it wasn't hard to see their disdain for the Buddhist domain. Buddha is compassionate. Has he ever appeared to save the world in troubled times? The Buddhists are busy preaching while the Taoists are coming out to save the world. However, I don't see the Taoists preaching the Tao. Buddha says that people are kind and charitable. It has always been monks begging for alms, but I have never seen monks giving alms. Buddha says that all living beings are equal, but Buddhas are divided into different ranks. Monk, Sant, Vajra, Bodhisattva, Buddha. Why were Buddhas divided into 3, 6, and 9 ranks, while others were equal? That's because Buddha sees all living beings as ants, and ants are all equal. Buddha is the most heartless. For a moment, no one could refute him. Now that he thought about it, it really did seem to be, as Gu Zichen said. This was the case with Buddha. In the Buddhist domain, people were divided into different ranks, and they still had to pay their respects. The world was in chaos. It was never the Buddha who appeared to save the world. It was the hero in troubled times, and it was the Taoist lord who wielded his sword. Was Buddha really so heartless? If that was the case, then who should he look for now? Yi Zichen was too busy to take care of both sides at the same time. I still want to try. Even if Gu Zichen said that, this was the only way Yi Zichen could think of. He clicked on the social media app on his phone. Barefoot Immortal. This was the only immortal Yi Zichen could contact who had some connection to the Buddhist domain. Unexpectedly, the message was sent with a red exclamation mark. I've been blocked. Seeing this, Yi Zichen immediately entered the group and frantically Barefoot Immortal. He knew that Barefoot Immortal hadn't left the group. When the other members saw this, they were all confused. They all asked about Yi Zichen's message, or helped him Barefoot Immortal. Ding dong. A notification sounded out. Barefoot Immortal's message appeared at the top of the screen. Star Lord Yi, I'm just an outer sect immortal. Please don't make things difficult for me. The Buddha decreed that the Buddhist domain is not to have anything to do with you. We all know about the victorious fighting Buddha situation. Taoist Xuanzang wanted to play with the Buddhist domain, so he was punished with 3,000 years of isolation. I'm used to living like a wild crane. Don't make things difficult for me. Really, I beg you. I'm very worried about the great sage's situation, but, sorry. Why? Yi Zichen sent the message like crazy, but all he got in return was a red exclamation mark. When he entered the group again, Barefoot Immortal had already left. Bang! Yi Zichen's fist slammed into the table, reducing it to dust. Yi Zichen couldn't help but pant angrily. The Buddha! The Buddha! Yi Zi! Emperor Hades called out tentatively. In truth, they already knew what the result would be. He'd been rejected. It was just as Gu Zichen had said. The Buddhist domain had chosen to avoid the world again. How could this be? Yi Zichen pulled at his hair and repeatedly questioned himself. The great sage. He'd once laughed proudly across heaven and earth, unrestrained and unrestrained. He clearly could have been the Yao King of Mount Huagua for a lifetime. The heavenly palace had summoned him, and the Buddhist race had allowed him to become a Buddha. Why? When the Buddhist Holy Buddha was in trouble, the Buddha refused to appear. The Holy Buddha, they'd slapped the great sage on their heads. Taoist Xuanzang's former golden cicada, the Buddha's most beloved disciple, had returned to the Buddhist domain without disappoint. His request, all to save his disciple's life. Why? Bang! At that moment, the door swung open. A huge figure appeared in front of everyone's eyes, and behind him were many familiar faces. You, Beiji, Monksand, the White Dragon Horse. This, they, Neza, Li Jing, the God of Thunder. The Jade Emperor and the Great Sacred Emperor equaling heavens were both here. Star Lord Yi. A weak voice called out from behind them. Tang Xuanzang walked in, supported by someone else. Taoist Xuanzang, didn't you? We've fallen out with the Buddhist domain. Canopy God's eyes were filled with mockery. His body was covered in wounds of varying depths. The White Dragon Horse, Monksand, and the others from the Heavenly Court were all the same. This wasn't falling out. This was a full-blown fight. You, my big brother Monkey, is my senior apprentice brother. Although he bullied me all the time, I can't just stand by and watch when he's in trouble. The Buddha is too disappointing. Taoist Xuanzang slammed his kasaya against the ground. Even now, he still couldn't believe that the Buddha he'd once trusted so much was now so cold and indifferent. There's no point in being a Buddha. I've always disliked those people from the Buddhist domain. That fight just now was really fun. The God of Thunder laughed. If they don't go, we'll go. Neza shook his head and snorted. A bunch of cowards. Star Lord Yi, the great sacred emperor equaling heavens, said. Ksitigarbha Bodhisattva wanted to save the great sage and the others, but the Buddha ordered him to stay. But before he came, he told me to bring you a message.